All right, everyone. Welcome to the Susquehanna Showdown, the final two tables of our citywide tournaments we've hosted. We now have 16 players to play in for a for a grand prize of $10,000 up top. And with me, I have Maria Ho.
Hey, happy to be here. Happy to see what these players are going to bring to the table today. I'm assuming that they all come from, worldwide different places, but, what they have in common is probably a little bit of a love for poker, some risk tolerance in them. So we'll see how they manage to get into the money today.
Yeah, I'm excited for when we get started. I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Anders Angerbjorn. I'm originally from Sweden. I'm a 5-year trader here at Susquehanna. I was an intern in 2019, and I've worked full time here since 2020. I was a single stock options market maker for 4 years, and since last year, I've moved up to our block trading desk in single stock options. So it's an honor to commentate with you, Maria. Obviously, I've seen you around the poker world before. You've done many commentaries before. This is my first one, so bear with me if I um, say some wrong things sometimes, but I'll try to do my best.
Well, you're doing great so far. And just a quick introduction for those who don't know me, I've been a professional poker player for 20 years now, and I started commentating around 2013. I've commentated on many poker events, such as the World Series of Poker main event to, super high roller bowl, also a lot of different European poker tour, US based poker tours, and I'm happy to be here with everybody today.
Awesome. Yeah. If you would look back, Maria, just as we wait for the players to take their seats and get started, do you have a favorite poker memory in your past?
My favorite poker memory has to be the first time I ever played in the World Series of Poker main event. That's by many considered to be the pinnacle of poker. And at the time, it was the highest buy in I had ever played. So, there's a lot of nerves surrounding a big spot such as that one. And I feel like some of the players coming in today might feel the same. A lot of these players, they may have never really played for a real cash prize. A lot of people get their start in home games, playing with friends, playing in the office, on the trading floor. And so, that I think will bring a little bit of pressure into the game that these players may not be used to. And of course, going into the strategy side of things, there's always a little bit of laddering in poker where, you might not have enough chips to necessarily put you in contention to win first place, but you want to outlast the other players so that you can keep moving up in the prize money, in the prize jumps. And so we might also see a little bit of that as we get closer to the money.
Yeah, that's a great observation. As you guys know, we will have 16 players spread across two tables, with one of them being an RFID table where we'll be on a delay, but the viewers will be able to see our players' hole cards on that feature table in real time, and we'll commentate as we go along. So with 16 players, we have prize money for the top 9 finishers. So to your point about laddering, when you start out, everyone's going to start with 5,000 chips and be spread across two tables. When you start getting down to 12, 11, 10 players, you might start looking around thinking, hey, even if I have a small stack, maybe I can conserve it for a little longer and see if I can squeeze into that, ninth or eighth spot.
Yeah, and the structure is interesting in the sense that everybody kind of has a reset now, right? Once they got to this point of being down to the final 16 players, they all come in with the same chip stack. So it's almost as if it's a brand new tournament. And I think another thing that players will find is that building reads early on is going to be really important for those moments when you get closer to the money and when you're playing for that big prize up top where some of those reads are going to come into play. And when I talk about reads, I'm talking about, things like sizing tells, their betting patterns, how frequently they are VPIPing, which is voluntarily entering the pot. And so I think it would behoove all of these players to start kind of picking up on the tendencies of their opponents so that it will serve them well later on when it really matters.
Right, absolutely. That's it's always one of um the big things you sit down at a new table. You might have played with one or two or three before, if they came from the city where you came from, and played your way into this tournament, or they might be a completely new face, and then you don't know. So to your point, you need to kind of keep an eye out. Does this player play a lot of hands? Do they play very few hands? Do they tend to, you know, always bet big? Do they vary their bet sizes and so forth? Those kind of questions, are things that I would ask myself if I sat down, with these players that I haven't really played much with before.
Especially now in the age where I think people do so many things over the internet, online, virtually, right? You don't very often get to see your opponents face to face anymore. And so I think a lot of players, they might, or people at home might be watching, being like, oh, yeah, I've heard about a poker face, right? And what does a poker face really entail? And to what I tell people is, when you are in person, a poker face is not, just one thing. It's a combination of different reads that you're building through, various small kind of micro expressions or things that they could be giving off that, you want to be able to pay attention to and hone in on. And the other thing about that is there's reverse tells as well, right? So forget about just, trying to keep track of first level things. Now we have to think about, okay, well, are they sharing quote unquote information or trying to convey information to me that they want me to think, but it's really to mask something else. So there's certainly a lot of levels to being in person, playing against your opponents in a live scenario such as this.
Right. And, we should keep in mind that all of these players, they did qualify, first through some sort of online qualifier from the city that they were in. And then they also played in a citywide tournament in their city. So we'll have four players coming from New York, four players from the Chicago area, four players from the Bay Area, and four players here from um, the Philadelphia area. So those four players were the ones that finished top four in each of their in-person tournaments that had somewhere between 80 and 100 players each. So these players have already um, accomplished a lot by not only qualifying into those 100-player tournaments, but then also ending up top four in those tournaments and getting to come here to play for a $10,000 prize up top. So, kudos to them. They've already established themselves as being able to navigate that big of a field and doing good reads here and there, but like you said, now we start over.
We'll see who had some time to do their homework and maybe brush up on their poker skills in the time that they had between qualifying and coming into today's play. And it looks like we do already, Anders, have our first featured table on the RFID in terms of the players. And again, these are randomly drawn, I assume, in terms of, in all tournaments, we do random seat draw so that there is no, prevention for colluding and things like that to happen. Of course, you always want to make sure that there's not situations that can get set up where, the ethics of the game could be in question.
Yeah, I see. I've gotten a notification as well. We got 8 players supposed to take their seats at the final table. Sorry, at the feature table, I should say, and another 8 players seated at the secondary table. So I guess we'll introduce them when they do take their seats and get their chip stacks. But for now, we will just have to eagerly await who gets to sit where.
Yeah, in the meantime, Anders, I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of what initially piqued your interest. Is this in poker? Is this like a chicken or egg scenario, right? Because obviously that skill set is very transferable to what you do at Susquehanna.
Yeah, of course. I actually my I played a little bit of poker here and there, kind of like you said before, with friends, just in college, some sort of low stakes games, or even just playing for fun. And then I heard of this tournament. So I was a Harvard grad, graduated in 2020, and during my sophomore year, I heard of this tournament being hosted at MIT by Susquehanna. It was a poker tournament that Susquehanna hosted at MIT at the time, and the Harvard players or Harvard students were involved to also kind of qualify for that tournament and playing that tournament. So I figured, hey, poker tournament, that sounds fun. I didn't really know much about Susquehanna at the time, but I qualified, played the tournament, and which was in person with traders as dealers um, at such a tournament. And so, I chatted with the dealers at the time, and actually ended up having a friend going to work as an intern that following summer. So that was kind of my introduction to Susquehanna. And I realized that, like you said, trading and poker, there's a lot of similarities. You have, dealing with uncertainty under sort of dealing with uncertainty with money at stake, which there aren't really that many other games, I think, out there at play. I mean, you look at chess, chess is a game of perfect information, whereas, poker and trading are games, so to speak, of uncertain information where you don't really know you don't have all the facts. You don't know what the future is going to bring. You can make probabilistic assessments, and use, like we talked about before, use your reads on certain players to estimate or guess if they have a good or bad hand. Similarly, in the real world, you can have certain ways of modeling the real world and what's going to happen in the future. But at the end of the day, you have to kind of bet your money or bet your chips on some outcomes that you think are under or overpriced. And so that was kind of my introduction to Susquehanna and poker. And I'm happy to say that I'm still here, still enjoying it 5 years later.
So are you a better poker player or a better trader?
Oh, that's a great question. I I would like to think that I'm a better trader. I feel like that's what my boss would want me to say, but no, I was actually, we have a company-wide poker tournament that is hosted every year, where everyone across the firm can play, traders, software developers, quants, operations, legal, everyone. So we just finished up that one a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't end up cashing, but I had a lot of fun playing it. I dealt a couple of the days as well in that one, and so the firm is still sticking strong to kind of to poker and to using it as a tool, to again kind of model uncertainty and help teach and explain some features of how you can use mathematics and probability to model situations where you bet money.
Listen, Anders, if this is the time that you want to take to tell me your bad beat story in the company wide tournament, and that's why you didn't cash, that's fine. I, I'm here for it. Go ahead.
No, no, no. It was not a bad beat. I only had 4.5 big blinds left,
Okay.
which I'm sure we'll see some of the players here come down to those stack sizes, and at that point, it's kind of a crapshoot. So
Right.
you just have to try to build your stack earlier than that. So
Yeah, and speaking of the structure, of course, this one is going to move fairly quickly, of course, just because we want to have this tournament finish in a certain allotted time. But in the beginning, there is quite a bit of play, again, starting at 50, 100 big blinds. So 50 big blind is what we would consider in a typical multi-table tournament to be, a fairly deep stacked tournament. So we'll see, again, what these players want to do in the beginning. You're going to see some players maybe start off again, like I said, being a little conservative, watching what everybody else is doing, hanging back a little bit, not getting too involved from the jump. But then there's other players who might want to start off with a lot of aggression and kind of set the tone for the table and become the table captain. So usually those are going to be the two schools of thoughts of people kind of approaching a starting table that may have players they're not really familiar with at all. And it looks like all 8 players have taken their seats. Oh, no, we're missing seat 4.
I think we are supposed to miss seat 4 just
Okay.
with how they're playing. I think they dealt out. since we'll have 8 players on one table, 8 players on the other, I think seat 4 is the one seat that's going to
Gotcha.
not be taken for for the start. So again, you guys see it on the screen here. We've got Sean, Abai, Drew, Joel, David, James, Hamong, and Atarva taking their seats at the feature table to start out with 5,000 chips, with 50 big blinds to start, like you said. So definitely some maneuverability early on. The blind levels will move pretty quickly, but like you said, I think we'll have a few interesting hands early on where it really will come down to, will some people try to play a lot of hands? Will they try to get involved and see if they can can do their best to outmaneuver their opponents, or do they want to play a little conservative, pick up some of those reads, um, and use those kind of later on, preserving their chip stack a little bit?
Yeah, and I mentioned this before, but a stat that we like to keep track of as professional poker players is VPIP, which is, voluntarily putting chips into the pot. And that is coming down to how many hands do they play in an orbit meaning one round at the table. So 8 hands. And VPIP does not include hands where you opt into the blinds, of course. And so I think that's something, again, if you are new to poker and you sit down at a table and you're like, how do I start building a player profile on my fellow opponents? That is a very easy way to do it. And then you might be asking, well, how do I know if they're playing too many hands? How do I know what is considered a high VPIP? And I would say that that number can range from, 18 to 22% of hands per orbit. Or if you want to think about it, just, if they're playing more than 1 or 2 hands per orbit, you can already start, of course, it's a really small sample, but you can start already building this idea that perhaps they might be playing too many hands. Of course, there's going to be outliers in the sense of maybe they're just getting hit with a deck, maybe they're getting dealt a lot of big hands in a very short period of time. And of course, you do have to account for that. But if you see somebody who's playing, 3, 4, 5 hands per round per orbit, that's somebody that you might want to be aware of and put them in a category of what we call a loose player. And a loose player is a player that plays too many hands. And some ways that you can combat loose players, of course, is knowing that they play too many hands. You know that most likely your range is going to be a lot stronger than the range of hands that they play. And so you can do things like re-raise them lighter, re-raise them wider, meaning, try to isolate them in hands because a lot of the times your hands that you're playing are going to be stronger, relatively speaking, to the ones that they are. And it looks like we're underway though, Anders.
We are. We've got James under the gun here with not a great hand. We got Hamong folding. Atarba's got an interesting hand here with 2 6s, relatively early position. He comes in for the race, makes it 300, 3 big blinds, with a big blind being 100 chips. And got Abe calling for 300 next to act, and David calling in the big blind. So we go to a flop 3 ways here.
Yeah, King 4 suited in the big blind for David. Definitely a nice hand to defend with.
Flop comes out Jack 8-3 with 2 diamonds. You see 2 quick checks from David and Atarva, and Abai is sitting there on top pair, is gonna put in a bet. And Atarva here is put in a tough spot. He raised with a pair and got called in 2 spots, and now he faces a bet on the flop. He's gonna make the call.
Wow, 6 right on a set of 6s. That is unfortunate for Abe there with a pair of jacks. Still, looking pretty good. A lot of draws possible, some flush draws, some straight draws. But Atarva just comes out firing 1K.
And he gets the call. Wow, we've got a big pot to start out the tournament here. We've got a pot of about 4,000. Oh, what a river card. The 10 of clubs makes all kinds of straights and flushes possible. Of course, if you had 2 clubs, you'd now have a flush. But Atarva is undeterred. He comes out and he bets for about half his stack here, about 1,500. And this is a tough spot for Abe.
100%. I mean, it's just one of those situations where the lead into the flop better is a little bit strange for Abe, maybe wondering what does that mean? Atarva really just leading out once he turned a set of sixes. And you can't really blame Abe for calling here because, the front door flush of diamonds did miss. So there are, maybe some hands that were going to fire on the river as a bluff. But either way, wow, that was a really big first pot.
Yeah, Atarva comes out to a great start here, picking up what was that, 3,700 chips in the first hand of play. It's a great start. When you play big tournament, perhaps the biggest tournament you've ever played, it's gotta feel good to come out and make a big hand and get paid in the first hand. All right, we've got a new hand with the action. Um, moving along, we've got Atarva making the call here with a speculative hand, Jack three, maybe feeling, he made some chips. He's going to see if he can make some more in this hand.
Yeah, I mean, some players they like to play what they perceive could be a rush of cards. So, sometimes any two can work.
Oh, wow, we've got James here in the big blind. He could have just checked, but he decides to come in for the race, and he gets a lot of respect here from um, both Atarva and Abe, who makes the fold with pocket nines, which you can't really blame him. The big blind it's going to be pretty tight when they come in with the race when again they have the option just to check and see a flop for free.
But look at this, Joel coming along, calling the three bet from the button with Queen seven offsuit. I mean, I guess he didn't quite believe James just thought maybe he had a really good squeeze spot there with so much dead money in the middle. And James just decides to check this flop after he misses.
Joel comes in with a small bet here, bets only 500 into 1700,
Okay, but
and
But I gotta say, I like this because at least Joel has a plan, right? If you're gonna call a three bet with Queen seven and you miss the flop, I'm glad to kind of see him fire and try to take that pot down on the flop. But unfortunately, James connects here with that ace on the turn. Does go check.
somehow,
Yeah.
yeah, somehow Joel figures out that he might not want to keep firing on that ace and checks behind on the turn, and now it's time to say goodbye to the Queen seven, I think. It's taking a little time here, maybe just not wanting to give away that he only had Queen high at the end.
Yeah, and that's going to be a really nice pot for James. And I think James is someone that, we can keep our eye on because just recognizing that spot as perhaps a good spot to three bet from the big blind is something that I think not a lot of players would necessarily take that line in that situation with that hand. And so seeing this early aggression from James tells me that perhaps he might step up as one of the more active players at the table.
Absolutely. All right, after a couple of interesting hands, now we have a little bit more of a slow start to the next one. We have David racing it up on the button, realizing he has pretty good position. He comes in for the smallest raise so far, 2.5 big blinds with a queen five offsuit.
Yeah, let's reset the RNG a little bit here, Anders. We're out of breath here following the action from back to back hands.
All right, pretty typical situation in a tournament here. You have the button who is the last to act before the blinds coming in for a raise pre-flop and then big blind calling. That's a spot that will come up again and again in a tournament like this where the button feels like they can take advantage of everyone else having folded and there being blinds left to fight for. And the big blind, of course, gets a good price to call. But here we see a quick check fold from the big blind, who didn't really pick up anything on that flop. So you move on to another hand.
And I think that's such an important note for people, again, just newer to poker, starting out, is so much of poker is not what hand you have, what hand you're dealt, but your position gives you a huge advantage in the game. And the later your position, the better it is for you to be able to act because you have so much information that gets shown to you or revealed to you by what the players do before it's your turn to act. So, speaking of kind of what you were saying, Anders, about, a game of incomplete information, the button gets the most information every hand.
Exactly. Here we've got Joel mixing it up again, coming in with the 10-5 suited, and he might just get a quick fold here from Otarva. Very tough spot with two sixes in the big blind here. Joe and Tarva lays it down with the two sixes, facing aggression on a flop with two overcards. I can't really blame him. It's hard because if you call a bet now, what are you going to do on the turn? If your opponent bets again, it's hard to feel like you have a great plan there. So um, Joel takes the hand down with a little bit of aggression, recouping some of his losses in the earlier Queen Seven hand.
Yeah, and it's also nice for Atarva that he's not becoming attached to this idea of like, oh, sixes worked out so well for me earlier. I should keep playing sixes because what I like to tell people, not only in poker, but poker, we're lucky it's a skill game. But if we're talking about real gambling games in the casino, in the pits, the cards have no memory, so the cards are not going to remember. So don't get attached to certain hands just because you feel like they've been working out well for you. Always take note of the situation because every situation is different.
Absolutely. Got David and Abe here in a pot. I want to say Abe um, called under the gun 100 chips, and then David came in for a raise. Um, David makes second pair, but might not feel very comfortable with a queen out there, and now it's even tougher with the ace coming on the turn.
Abe decides to check though, and David does have some outs to improve to a straight to Broadway. So he does check back. He has some showdown value, of course, with the pair of jacks, and this is a fairly innocuous river.
Yeah, if I'm in David's shoes here, I'm thinking if Abe had an ace or even a queen, is it not possible he would have bet on the turn? My pair of jacks might be good here.
Yeah, and this is why it's so hard kind of coming into play when you don't really have a lot of history with your opponent is you're not sure what to make of this spot where they check the turn but bet the river when you're wondering if hands that have you beat might have bet the turn as you mentioned. But that is a very nice disciplined laydown by David there.
Deciding he has the chips, he can wait to find a better spot and doesn't have to just come out here guessing early on at the feature table. Nice little pickup for Abe, who's now back up over 2,000 chips. So everyone still has over 20 big blinds, a lot in the day. A lot of marginal hands to start, but Atarva here on the button, looking to get involved with the 7-4 offsuit, thinking that maybe he can see a flop for free, but Sean puts in the race with the pocket tens and gets a quick fold. So nice little pickup for Sean. Might have been the first hand we've seen from him so far, just with the two tens there. And here we can see the some of those stats we were talking about earlier at the bottom of your screen. We've got aggression frequency. So, people with a higher aggression frequency have, been more aggressive early on, taking aggressive actions, racing, three betting, putting more money in the pots.
Yeah, and so far, it's still early on. We've seen a lot of that aggression come from hands that they should be aggressive with. But as we get more deeper into play and these players start feeling even more comfortable, I'm sure they're going to start opening up some of their aggression to some of the more speculative hands, to some of those hands where they're just simply playing their opponents and not really playing their cards.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's still early on to make a lot of um, clear clear kind of reads. You've seen 7 or 8 hands. It's very easy that someone who's raced 3 or 4 times. Oh wow. I'll interrupt myself here to
Oh,
note that we have a big bet if the graphics are correct here from Hamong. After being checked to on this flop, he's saying, you know what? I've got my two jacks, and I'm gonna wager it all.
Yeah, and as much as Joel seemed to want to see a turn card with the 10-9 suited with a gut shot to the straight, he of course has to fold against that size.
Yeah, yeah. Hamong takes it down. Uses his pair to leverage and get his opponent to fold some equity. Of course, the 10-9 suited when you have two jacks doesn't have a lot of ways to make the best hand, with you holding two jacks and blocking those. Um, but yeah, the two jacks takes it down, and now it's Hamong with the 10-9 suited here in the next hand.
Yeah, now you're kind of seeing the differences between how people are approaching their starting hand selection and the ranges with which they want to enter into the pot. We saw a 10-9 suited being played, but now we see a 10-9 suited being folded. So again, some players might feel more comfortable playing some of the marginal hands while some other players want to play a little tighter and play a more narrow range when they enter the pot.
Yeah, we should note here that the level just went to level 2 here. So we went up to 100, 200 blinds. So now, that's another thing to keep in mind. We're looking at the previous hand where Hamong uh, put in the bet with the two jacks. When the blinds are just about to go up, you really are looking at uh, you think of the next blind level. You say, well, I don't really have that much left. Maybe I just make sure I take this pot down. So accordingly, on your screen, you'll see how the number of big blinds went down for every player, meaning the blinds went up. So when you count their chip stack in terms of the number of big blinds, with the big blind currently being 200 chips, forced bet from the second blind. When you look at the ratio of your stack to the big blind, now of course when the blinds doubled, the number of big blinds relative to the big blind has halved. So we've got Abe with just about 10 big blinds here, which starts to get to a position where you get a little bit nervous. You know it's very costly to play.
Yeah, and that's kind of the threshold where you will start seeing players going all in before the flop is once they get down to about 10 big blinds or less, you know, in terms of picking up the small blind and the big blind, it's just so much more valuable for them, of course, to shove and take down the blinds because that will represent, a 15 to 20% sometimes increase to their chip stack, especially if we were playing a structure that had a big blind ante in there. It would be so meaningful for them to pick that up, versus just perhaps calling and bleeding out one big blind at a time. You really do want to start thinking about hands that are good enough for you to go all in pre-flop with. And, once we start seeing some examples of that, we'll make sure to point them out to you.
Absolutely. All right, we've got Atarva coming in for a call here. Still has the biggest stack at the table. Can play a little bit. Gets a fold from the pocket threes in the position after him. And now David's got a little bit of an interesting situation. Just comes in for a call here with the king 10 suited. Obviously, a very beautiful hand, one that's in that you think you could raise, but you're also again in the worst position. If you do raise and you get called, um, you're gonna have to navigate the flop, turn, and river, having to act first every time. But here he does flop top pair, and James, who got to just check the big blind, is probably gonna have an easy laydown here with the king two. But Atarva also made top pair. He's certainly gonna want to stick around. So we'll see how this one plays out. But it's looking dire for Atarva so far. Fortunately, he has some chips to maneuver with.
That is a very interesting turn, though. With the two of clubs, it does give Atarva now a flush draw to go with a pair of tens, even though he is outkicked right now by David, and no chips being put in on the turn by either player.
Yeah, I mean David looking at it saying, "Hey, I got a call from Atarva um, on the flop. He could have a flush draw here. He could have pair better than mine. He could have a better kicker. Don't necessarily feel that comfortable when the most obvious draw comes in on the turn. But now check on the turn. David says, I think I still probably have the best hand after the turn checked around. So I'm gonna try to squeeze out a little bit of value, see if I can get called by a 10 or an 8 here.
And I feel like with the odds that Atarva's being laid here, I think that he has a very nice hand to call with, even though, of course, we see that it would be losing. But, it's 350 to win 1.8K in chips. And he does block some flushes and some straights. But again, just another disciplined fold that we are seeing, and I think that's something that people might want to take note of is that a lot of players that are newer to the game, they are a little bit hesitant to bluff rivers. Rivers are kind of the hardest street for players to feel comfortable bluffing. People feel comfortable maybe being aggressive pre-flop or putting in a continuation bet on the flop. But the river is where I think you can start finding some more bluffs, but also some bluff catching spots once you notice that there is a player who seems to be betting rivers at a high frequency, right? And I think in that situation and what we've already seen so far is that when someone bets on the river, they've been playing pretty honest, and so their opponent ends up folding, um, and 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 they're correctly folding hands that I think sometimes will find calls. So I think it's interesting to just keep an eye on how that dynamic might change as we keep playing.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't exactly see how big the three bet was, but David kind of picks up a nice pot here and takes down another pot. And we still have everyone that we started with us here after 10 or 11 hands. But yeah, it's starting to get costly to play, and we'll see if someone puts in some big river bluffs to your point. But like you said, it requires a lot of heart. You really have to not only think that your opponent is bluffing, but also think that you're winning something from raising. Because sometimes, if you think your opponent is bluffing, maybe your better option is just to call, right? Like if they're bluffing, they're gonna fold to a raise anyway. And so the the river the river raise as a bluff is certainly one that you don't see very often, but it can be very profitable, certainly against the right opponent.
Yeah, not surprised to see nobody eliminated. Of course, nobody wants to be the first person out at perhaps their very first live streamed table, right? I mean, they want to stick around and they want to be able to play a little bit more. And also that's also just a reason that some players might decide to be more aggressive is kind of noticing, hey, these players seem to be playing really snug. Maybe they just want to last a few more hands and enjoy this experience a little bit more, and I'm going to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think we've started to see some hints of that, but again, still very early to make a lot of kind of conclusive um, comments to that effect. But here, we've got James coming in, maybe trying to pick up the blinds here with the queen six suited. Atarva's got a nice hand to call within the small blind with the king queen, and Sean faced a decision here in the big blind, and he's going to keep up the aggression and put in a three bet for looks like about a quarter of his stack here to 1.3 thousand. James lays down his queen six. It makes sense, but Atarva is now in one of those tough spots that you often find yourself in if you call a bet in the small blind pre-flop where you've shown that maybe you don't have the top of your range. Maybe you would have raised if you yourself had a really strong hand. Um, but at the same time, king queen, I mean, it's a good hand, so you got to try to weigh the likelihood that your opponent really has you crushed here versus the pot odds you're given, because the pot's already 2.4 thousand. He only needs to call about a third of that, so he's really getting 3 to 1 on a call.
Yeah, and it looks like he does come along, and unbeknownst to him, he's pretty much in a coin flip situation against his opponent's exact holding. So not a bad spot to be in, but just bricks the flop here. No connection whatsoever for the king queen, and still decent flop for jacks. Just one overcard. Ooh.
Some action turns we're getting here. That's gives Atarva a good pair at that. But perhaps a little bit still scared of the ace out there. He checks, and Sean here with the Jack high flush draw now with four hearts. He checks it back as well. Hard to get value in a spot like that. Maybe you get called by two sixes with a heart, but generally kind of an understanding street from both players.
Yeah, and it looks like they're just going to go ahead and check all the way down, and Atarva is going to win at Showdown with the pair of kings. Just a little bit unfortunate of a run out for Sean. That ace high on the flop just did not allow him to really see bet, and unfortunately that allowed Atarva to catch up on the turn.
Yeah, another nice pot for Otarva. Sean's looking out, thinking about what could have been if things had gone differently. But again, still a good amount of chips for everyone to maneuver. And we've seen multiple three bets so far, which I did not have on my bingo card coming into today. I thought it would start out a little slower, a little more passive, maybe some raises, some calls, some folds. But there's been some real aggression so far.
Yeah, I like to see that. And I also really like to see, some of these players kind of opening up their game. That Queen Six suited on the cutoff open is solver approved for sure, but it's not one that everybody is willing to take. It's not a race spot that, the average player would necessarily want to get themselves involved with.
Yeah, exactly. It's one where you put pressure on everyone else, and don't necessarily have the strongest hand, but you can still make a high pair and so forth. Um, Interesting spot developing here with another situation where someone flops kind of a low pair to the board, and they don't feel that certain of where they are, and Atarva, of course, missing the flop and the turn, but spikes the queen on the river and might get a little bet coming here from Abe, who, with no aggression from his opponent, is going to try to squeak out a little bit of value here with the two tens. But you have to think Atarva's considering a call here.
Does look like Atarva puts in a raise, and that's really interesting to see. I mean, I'm assuming here that he is raising for value just because of the fact that it went check on the flop and checked on the turn, but it's definitely a thin raise, I think, for some players to make. And Abe now kind of put in a tough spot, does block, you know, some straights, and is probably wondering to himself, what type of hands does Atarva check back on the flop and check back on the turn, but is now willing to raise the river? The story, again, doesn't make a lot of sense for some of the strongest value. Shouldn't really have trip kings here, shouldn't really have, you know, one of those like sixes full or something like that. But anyhow, does fold, and Atarva just very firmly in the top spot here at this table, doubled his starting stack, has 10K. And I'd like to see Atarva, start to open up his game a little bit more. Now he's created some real separation between him and the rest of his opponents. And, with the blinds continuing to go up, now we're at level 3, blinds being 150 in the small blind and 300 in the big blind. You really want to start pressuring those shorter stacks that just can't really afford to get involved without a good hand.
Yeah, and conversely, Abe here in a tough spot, is down to 1,000 chips to start this hand. The blinds just went up to 150, 300, and if I'm Abe here and I flop top pair in the small blind, I would consider just saying, you know what, I have 700 left. If I'm beat, I'm beat. But it might work out for him anyway. We have Drew coming out here betting with a gut shot, meaning one card away from a straight, from an inside straight draw. So yeah, he's looking for a 5 for a straight or an ace or a 6 for a pair, of course. He's gonna bet and get a top of the fold, and Abe sitting with a little bit of a tough spot with only a pair of fours. There's a lot of bad cards that come out. Your opponent could have a flush already, could have a higher pair, in which case you're obviously doing very, very poorly equity wise. But the blinds keep going up. So, when you start getting down to that, 5 or 3, 5, 10 big blind mark, at some point you have to put your money in the middle and hope for the best.
Yeah, I would say a general rule of thumb, if you're sitting with a short stack, sub 10 big blinds here, you want to start thinking about going all in with, any type of ace X holdings, any pair, of course, some of those Broadway hands like king, queen, king jack, you know, all of the queen 10 suited type hands, those are going to play well. What you really have to think about is fold equity, right? When we talk about why do you need to start getting aggressive when you get short, is because you want to be able to go all in and not have players be priced in to call you. But once you get so short, once you get down to three big blinds, you think about somebody who's in the big blind in this hand, and if you went all in, they're already, have one big blind committed, and it's going to be very hard to find any fold equity there. In this situation here, we've got Joel versus James heads up in this pot, and both players holding an ace.
Yeah, both players with an ace and both players with kicker problems. At least they think so. You know, definitely a hand where you could see one of them getting the other one to fold because there's so many other scare cards out there. Of course, there's four diamonds. If anyone has a single diamond, if you don't, you're drawing dead at this point. So um, Joel's kind of come out and try to make a little bet and see if he can either get some value from a worse hand, from a pair of king or pair of jacks, or get a fold perhaps from a hand that might have some equity. Um,
And we see James putting in the raise. And again, this is just a situation where I think maybe he senses a little bit of weakness from the sizing of Joel's bet there and decides to put in the raise. Joel, not a believer. And the river is the seven of clubs. And they're going to end up chopping this pot if it gets to showdown, but we'll see. Looks like Joel is reaching for chips here, or counting his stack at least.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation where if he does bet it out, you in James's spot, you have to start putting together the story of what is Joel saying? What hand would bet the turn, call a raise, and then bet out on this relatively innocuous river? Of course, Joel comes out here with a very small bet, called a block bet by some, and it's hard to see James doing much other than calling here, but I think he also has the opportunity to put in that river almost bluff at this point. In line with what we were saying earlier, that if you don't really think your opponent has you beat, um, but you're not sure exactly where you're at, some aggression might actually take the pot down. So James is running over his options, but seems to say call out loud, and they're gonna both be pretty hesitant here, but be pretty happy when they chop the pot, I think.
Yeah, and I don't mind Joel trying to take this line with, leading the river, but I think the problem was his sizing. I do feel like if he was willing to go a little bit bigger, perhaps that would have given James a little more to think about, could have gotten him to fold a chop. But either way, no harm, no foul on this hand. They're going to get their money back and what was in the middle.
And Abe just getting through the blinds here. He's going to have a few more hands where he can see a few cards for free. But then when the big blind comes around to him next time, it's gonna get tricky with only 700 chips. Um,
And I think what
Otherwise, yeah, go ahead.
And I think what's important for players to remember is, don't just be paying attention when you're involved in the hand. There's so much information to be gleaned at Showdown. Just right now, seeing the fact that James was willing to put in a raise there with nothing but top pair on a board that was four flush, it's just information again that you want to keep building into your database that you can use against these specific opponents later on. So, sometimes it's so easy to kind of just not pay attention and drift in and out if you're not actually involved in the hand. But you have to remember that there's always so much that you can be picking up on. So it's important to stay observant and perceptive.
Exactly, and use all the information available to you to try to make good decisions in the future. Again, a bit of an analogy to the trading, I feel like, where there are so many situations where if you just try to get a little bit better every day and pick up on some observations every day, you will, a month to 5, 12 months down the line be a lot better as you kind of learned and observed things, in the markets or in your own kind of decision making. So.
So how do you, Anders, do you feel like you keep track of some of these things that you're talking about, in regards to trading specifically, because of course in poker we're kind of assessing the information, we are keeping this mental track, but do you actually physically, put it down somewhere, review it later on?
Yeah, so I think, a big thing is you can, do a lot of things, in terms of data mining these days where you don't necessarily need to, keep physical tracks and physical notes of, hey, did this work? Did that work? You can look back and look over your data after 12 months and say, this type of decision that I've made or this type of trade that I've deployed in this situation, has it actually P&L'd well? Has the strategy made money? Um, but outside of that, I think something that I try to do on a daily basis is jot down a little thought to myself if I feel like I missed something or didn't consider something. That's like it's harder to spot those things, I think, in a data set, and it's more things where I'm saying to myself, look, if I did incorporate all the information to me, I would have made a better decision. And so just try to be a little bit more aware of X or Y, think a little bit more of what the market conditions were, or what the other trades in the market were going on at the same time, and kind of just making those mental notes and looking back and saying, okay, well, 2 months ago I had three notes on this topic, but I've since then kind of plugged that leak, to use a poker language. I've
Yep.
made sure uh, to always, or at least catch myself before I make that mistake again. I mean, those things I think are really important and sometimes, hard to see just by a P&L study, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good kind of parallel that we can continue to draw between, poker and what you do, is that I think in poker it's so important to not necessarily be results oriented. So let's say you did win the pot, right? And you need to take a step back and not think, "Oh, I must have played it perfectly." There's still so many other small decision points within the scope of the full hand where perhaps you could have optimized better, right? And so it sounds like that's what you're doing is, even if the numbers, on the P&L look great, that doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't something else that you could have optimized or honed in on just to extract that extra value next time.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much variance, of course, both in poker and in trading, where you really have to focus more on the process than on the results in the kind of day to day to keep yourself from overcorrecting, one way or another. Looking back to the poker here, we've got Abe with a good shot of actually tripling up here. It looks like with a queen jack suited, he puts all the money in pre-flop, and with two callers or two players continuing past to the flop, we see Abe flopped the flush draw, and Hamong is going to come out here and bet 600, I believe, into a dry side pot here, meaning Abe can only win what was in the pot pre-flop, so he can only win to 2,300, I believe, and whatever other action.
This is
Go ahead.
But this is wild
Yeah.
because he gets David to fold the best hand, which were a pair of eights. And now Abe's actually just ahead with Queen Jack against Queen Four. So, what a turn of events for Abe there. Did not have to contend with the made hand and now has the best hand, but ends up drawing to the flush anyways. And I think, that's one thing you do have to be a little bit cautious of is betting into a dry side pot versus perhaps, you know, having this inexplicit kind of agreement with your opponent that you might just check it down in order to hopefully eliminate that all in opponent and bring everybody closer to the money.
Right, exactly. I mean, in this spot, we see Abe benefiting. I mean, he would have made the flush in this case anyway, of course, but sticking to the process and not the result, like you said, Abe is certainly very happy to see a bet from one of his opponents on that flop, which in this case worked out really well for him. Getting the second, or the best hand really on the flop to get out of the way. So now everyone is kind of somewhat even there between 2,500 to 5,500, and of course with Atarva still in the lead at the table. And now we've got a big classic spot, some might say, with the blinds again still pretty high here, 150, 300. Drew comes in for the race with the two jacks to 900, and Among here looking pretty comfortable going all in with the ace king suited.
Well, according to the man behind the curtain, 3,500.
And Drew just putting in some thought here with jacks. Gotta appreciate, the stylistic flair he has brought to this table today, but I don't know if he's gonna be able to make the call, and he does fold here. And we do see, of course, again, that it is a flip, but you have to take these spots, especially when we're still in the mode of the tournament, which is chip EV, which is, we're playing for chips. It's not the point where these chips have a dollar value that you can associate with it. We are not in the money. We're not very close to the money. So you do have to take those risks. You do see a quick little graphic there of everybody's VPIP here at this feature table.
Yeah, maybe something that was that Drew considered, where Hmong, has a relatively low VPIP, hasn't volunteered to put money in the pot that many times so far. We played 20 hands at this point, and now came in for the three bet all in, which we haven't seen that many pre-flop all ins. So a little bit of a tough spot certainly with the jacks, and hard to know exactly which hands Hmong does that with. Of course, in this case, the two jacks uh, would have been in decent shape. But still, it's a lot of variance. It's a lot of risk when you have to put all your money in, and sometimes you prefer to live to play another day. But to your point, maybe if you look at the math and you say, well, if I had to put in 3,800, but I had a 50-50 chance of winning a 9,000 chip pot, you start to have to take those gambles. And we see the blinds go up here one more time. We've got 200, 400 with everyone's with everyone's chip stacks here really getting a little bit smaller relative to the blinds. So no, of course, what you want to keep in mind is how much value there is in playing for and winning the blinds. You pick up 600 chips if everyone folds, and if you're Drew here and you start with about 6,000 chips, you increase your chip stack by 10% if you're able to get a fold from everyone. So certainly a hand you want to play with. We see a quick hand clap here from Joel. I think that means that we may have lost a player from the secondary table. A tradition here at Susquehanna to clap in a poker tournament in the office if someone gets eliminated, no matter if it's at your table or another table. So
Are we clapping to say good job, like GG, or are we clapping to be like, yes, we've eliminated a player? Which one is it?
it's certainly intended to be the former. Good job, GG. They've all traveled a long way and done really well to get here. So,
But
you know,
secretly, there's a couple people that are like, yeah, we're getting closer.
certainly when you get down to a smaller and smaller field, that can be a factor. But yeah, we see Drew here just taking it down with the aggression pre-flop, puts in the race with the ace 10, gets 600 chips, and now he's up to second in chips at the table. So certainly a great result for him.
Yeah, we see that nearly almost half the table is getting below that 10 big blind stack size. And again, just something to keep an eye on, that I hope we will start seeing some all-ins from the shorter stacks, because again, just being able to pick up the blinds really increases your stack by a very considerable percentage, that you want to start doing that. And Joel raising with ace 8 here off of a fairly short stack himself.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting, you play versus various people and you have to try to guess, how they're going to play and therefore how you should play. And I think it's sometimes interesting where if you think the rest of the table is really, um, you know, uh, very going to be very aggressive or very passive, you would want to maybe adjust your strategy. But, here's a spot where maybe if Joel had just gone all in pre-flop, sure, he does risk a little bit more, but he wouldn't have to, go to a flop versus the big blind who got a pretty good price to see a flop. Of course, here Joel makes top and bottom pair and has Drew drawing dead by the turn. But but perhaps a little bit more risk, almost like riskier to just raise than to go all in to some extent. So we'll see how the rest of the tournament plays out. But
Yeah,
Joel,
and
go
in
ahead.
that sense, Joel, we did see him try to slow play by checking back the flop. Now he's not going to get any action because Drew just hasn't connected. But it's really interesting to just think about kind of the part of poker that has been solved, which is this push fold part, right? It's at equilibrium, with certain stack sizes. What are the hands that you are supposed to go all in with? And then what are the hands that are supposed to call your all ins with? And I think the beauty of poker, to some that might be boring because they're like, oh, well, we're just memorizing this range of hands for these stack sizes. But the beauty of poker becomes kind of understanding, are your opponents shoving too wide? Are your opponents calling too wide? And once you know that, and once you can kind of make that assessment, then you can deviate and widen your ranges for the people that are, calling too narrow, and, perhaps calling wider for the people that are shoving too wide. And so all of these little deviations from equilibrium is kind of where you make your money in poker.
Exactly, and here we see David doing, what you talked about earlier. He just puts all of his chips in. He's got about 11 and a half big blinds, really trying to pick up those 600 chips that are already involuntarily put in there by the small blind and the big blind. And Joel perhaps doing a little hand funeral here with the 7-6 suited, not that excited to lose his big blind, but at the same time not really wanting to risk it all with the the suited connector.
Yeah, and hands like 7-6 suited and those types of hands in that hand class, they look really pretty, but those are hands that you want to see a flop with. They're not really hands that you want to call all ins with, even though we saw in that situation you do have two live cards, but there's just going to be a lot of better spots where you will just have a much bigger edge in terms of, your hand versus their hand when you see a 5 card run out.
Right. I wonder if we're pausing a minute to move a player over, perhaps, um, or if we're just confirming where the button should be. It seems like the latter, as we have a new hand underway here.
Yeah, there certainly has not been a shortage of action, though, Anders. I feel like in our prep call, we were maybe anticipating some more conservative play, or, maybe just not so many kind of big hands clashing against each other early, but we have really just had so many flops and turns and rivers and so many kind of 3 bets. We're only on hand 25 of the day.
Yeah, it's been, I think despite also we haven't seen that many huge hands. Like I don't think we've seen really a lot of super premium. We've seen jacks a couple of times, recently a couple of ace kings, but early on, it was a lot of players just trying to get after it, trying to see if they can build up a chip stack to carry them onto the actual final table for later. But now we have Joel here, perhaps going after the pot with a king eight suited, thinking that if Abe had a good hand, he might have gone all in himself. So Joel's gonna take the bait and try to go after what's now 1,000 chips in the middle, the two blinds, of course, and Abe's 400 chip call. So,
And I like this move from Joel a lot. I think it shows a lot of awareness for the situation, but he does get called. He doesn't expect Abe to have such a good hand when he didn't go all in himself.
right, but at the end of the day, it's not horrible. You're risking, of course, on that flop, it's pretty bad, but when you're risking, I think in this case, 1,700 versus Abe, there's also the 600 from the blinds. So, you're risking 17 to win 23. Of course, when you're up against King 10 suited, you only have 32%. But oftentimes, Abe's either going to fold, which is great for you, or when he calls, he has ace 5 off, or, Jack 10 suited or something, where you're actually doing quite okay with the King 8. So,
Absolutely.
fun to see Joel going after it. Of course, he does not get rewarded in that hand, but still has a playable stack here with 6 or 7 big blinds. can see the players looking up at the board they have down there, where they can see, who's still left in the tournament and what chips everyone has. Certainly, a lot of nerves, of course, still in there. We've played for, what is this, about an hour, maybe 40, 45 minutes for the people watching the stream, and there is still a lot of money to be won, and the players, know that they don't necessarily want to go out in 11th or 12th or 13th or 14th when there is real money to be won up top. So might start to get a little bit more conservative here as people realize that everyone else is also close to being knocked out. So I don't want to get knocked out myself, but we'll see. Maybe some people try to go for the top prize and get aggressive. That can also be a good strategy when you really want to win it all. You get a little bit more aggressive, and either go out in flames, or you build up a good stack and you can leverage that later.
Yeah, and I think the thing about tournament poker, of course, is because the blinds always keep going up after, a set number of minutes, you have to remember that you can't just sit and wait for a good hand, because again, your stack will just start dwindling down and you will lose that fold equity. So while some players might be like, oh, maybe I could just wait out a couple of players, you also have to weigh that against the fact that next time you're all in, you are going to be called no matter what. And when you have to see a run out, whenever your tournament life is on the line, you never really want to be in that situation, right? Because the equities are going to run quite close.
Exactly. Harva here with the Jack 10 suited, still with the most chips at the table and has some playability here. He's going to come in for the race, and he really puts everyone else at the table in a tough spot where they kind of have to be prepared to maybe play for it all. Of course, James in the big blind, maybe can come along with the queen 10 off, but Atarba showing a lot of strength, racing in this case. He's had a couple of other hands where he's just called pre-flop. So when he now comes in for the race first to act, shows a lot of strength, and James is gonna look for another spot to play.
Yeah, Natarva for most of the day has been atop the chip counts. Originally from Mumbai, India. His best poker advice is always go all in when you have pocket aces. I'm going to second that. Anders, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I certainly agree. I think it's generally good advice. I've seen it misapplied sometimes where people, quote unquote, they get married to their aces
Yes.
Post flop. If you have a good hand pre-flop, it doesn't always mean that it's going to be a good hand post flop. But certainly if we're talking pre-flop, it's something I would sign off on.
Looks like action is folded around to Joel, who's going to call the 600 with King Deuce offsuit.
David with a King 10 is not quite sure what to believe. Joel's been somewhat aggressive earlier, so if he just calls now, is he trapping? Is he trying to make a move? It's hard to tell. So Joel actually gets in for a cheap flop here with the King Deuce playing heads up versus Hemong. Joel in position, Hemong out of position, and neither player flops a piece. But from what we've seen from Joel so far, I wouldn't be surprised if this goes check from Hemong and bet from Joel. But I'm wrong. Joel just checks it back with his king high, and both players pick up a gut shot on the turn. A 2 for Hemong to make a straight, and of course a 3 for Joel.
And Hemong just willing to go for a bet here on the turn. Does have some equity to a gut shot, but just kind of seeing that passive action on the flop from Joel, feeling like he doesn't have a strong hand. And we see Joel call. I mean,
Is that an all-in chip, perhaps?
Wait.
You see the little red chip? It looked like it might be an all-in button
did
being
he go all in? Oh my gosh, he did.
Joel.
He did go all in. I mean, he does in fact have the best hand and a gutter of his own. So, this I would assume has to work, even though again Hemong maybe feels like He has a decent price. You still just have jack high. You're trying to draw to a straight and a little posturing, perhaps, of course, and does fold.
Yeah, sometimes, even if you are bluffing like Hmong was doing in this case, you might not want to make it too obvious to your opponents that you were in fact bluffing. So taking the few extra seconds to at least make it seem like you had a decent hand, might be good to quote unquote, preserve your table image to not give away the fact that you were just bluffing with nothing. So can't
Definitely.
can't blame Hmong for taking a second to let go of the Jack deuce, Jack three.
Yeah, and even though, this is live streamed and this will be available for them to watch back later, in game, you definitely still want to, as you mentioned, preserve your table image. And, even though this is going to be information that your opponents can access later, that won't necessarily help them in this situation, but maybe if you play again, that might be something you want to keep in mind.
That is also another good analogy to trading, where the idea of playing someone again, or having a certain counterparty that you encounter in the wild again in the future, in various situations, can be very valuable information. If you've seen a certain behavior by by a certain counterparty, or oh wow, we've got real action here. I'll cut my story short by just saying the idea of, knowing who you're up against and keeping in mind how they play, is certainly important. But here we have Drew, I think three betting pre-flop, or maybe just racing over a limp with the ace four suited, and everyone else, um, or two players fold, I think, to Joel, who puts in the all in with the ace five, thinking that, if I'm gonna win, I gotta start getting aggressive here. And if he gets a call here, that's a great win. Risking 4,000 to win 3,500. It's if your opponent folds, you've doubled up with quote unquote no risk. But um, tough spot for Drew, thinking that Joel really has to have a decent hand.
Yeah, but I will say that Joel is probably one of the few players at this table who has shown to be quite aggressive in these all in spots. And so, Drew does end up making the call with ace four suited. And again, just getting such a good price. And then you factor in what you've kind of seen from Joel, with him shoving earlier with the king eight suited and getting called by the king 10 suited. And a lot of times this hand will end in a chop, both of them with very low kickers here.
This is, oh wow, and
Oh,
Drew outflops him immediately. Not a lot of backup help for Joel here either. At least he picks up the gut shot here. Needs a two or a five to stay alive. And he doesn't find it. That's our first elimination of the featured table. Goes for Joel. Sad to see him go, but certainly one of the players who are willing to fight for it all.
yeah, very fun to watch. Joel's originally from New Jersey and he goes to New York University with a major in math and computer science. He's been playing poker for 3 years. His
I think
his best poker advice is do not tilt and be patient. I don't think he tilted, but maybe he could have had a little more patience. I don't know.
maybe you know what? I think in this kind of blind structure, sometimes the patience can hurt you as well. So
Yeah.
I certainly don't mind putting it in with this 7 or 8 big blinds in this spot, and just getting a little bit unlucky. But hey, again, you're looking at one of these hands, and it's a coin flip, mostly because they're likely to chop. But you could flop a five, your opponent could flop a four, and he's just on the bad end of that one. So Drew, the beneficiary, comes out, picks up pocket fours immediately the next hand. Might want to put those chips to use, but he thinks better of it. And Drew's been playing somewhat snug, I think. I don't think he's been picking up that many hands, but I think that fold um,
And the
and otherwise,
Jacks,
right.
yeah, definitely has been a little bit on the tighter side, but hopefully he will start opening up his game a little more now that he has some chips. And I think that's also, another thing about poker that's so important to remember is you never want to start autopiloting or phoning it in, because the variables keep changing. Poker is so dynamic that, the stack size fluctuations from one hand to the next, and the way that chips are distributed around the poker table, these are things that change constantly. And you always want to keep an eye on that, because that's going to affect your strategy and the way that you want to approach every hand.
Absolutely. As we see an all in here from Sean, looking down at the two nines, which I believe he may have folded in an earlier hand, pretty early in our session, but this time he takes his two nines to war here, and Abe sitting with the ace king. Ace king, often considered a pretty good hand pre-flop. You can flop an ace, you can flop a king, you can river an ace, you can turn a river, a good pair that is likely to beat your opponents, but at the same time, when you're up against the pocket pair, you need to hit. And you see him thinking about it here, not sure if he wants to risk it all, but he's also got another player behind him to contend with. Hemong, of course, came in with a raise after Abe just called pre-flop, but looks like Abe is putting in the calling chips here for the all-in from Sean. And now Hemong is actually in a little bit of a tricky spot, I think. King
Yeah,
Jack, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, King Jack certainly not really a great hand to be over calling with. Perhaps if Abe didn't call before him, he would have a little more to think about. And, again, we have another coin flip, but because we do have a king that is dead in Hamong's hand, of course, that decreases Abe's chances a little bit here of hitting one of his two overcards against Sean.
Yeah, it's a big pot. I mean, it's to make or it's to collect 6,200 chips, which would put you, I think, second or third at the table. Tough flops and turns for Abe, but of course he has a little bit behind, even if he does not catch help on this river here. Board runs out with the two nines holding up for the win for Sean, who survives and goes up to 10 big blinds with 6,200 chips, and Abe still back again to that tough seat with only a few blinds, soon to come into the big blind as well. So I'm sure we'll keep seeing some fireworks here with players getting a little bit short on chips, but still a lot of maneuvering where the king jack. Do you want to put it in? Do you not? It's gonna be a lot of those spots, I think, going forward, where you have those marginal hands that sometimes you go with and sometimes you don't, and some players might be more inclined to do so than others.
So, what is your favorite hand, Anders?
So I was going to ask you earlier, actually, when we were talking about you mentioned players can sometimes in the pits they can get a little bit attached to various situations. They think that just because red has hit a few times in a row, now the next spin is going to be black. For a similar reason, I did not bring up that I do in fact have a favorite hand myself, which is actually very funny. It comes up here on our screens with the Jack Nine of Spades exactly from Sean. Unfortunately, he does not play it, but that one in fact happens to be my favorite combination of all the cards. Do you have one?
I'm really boring, and my favorite hand is pocket aces. Just give me the best starting hand. That's my favorite hand. So tell me why Jack Nine suited, though, or of spades, I guess, specifically.
Honestly, I couldn't even tell you. It's one of those things that I think it looks pretty. It can make straight flushes. If I want like my favorite hand to be a hand that can make a really good hand. Aces. If you have aces, the most of the time you're just gonna win by having a pair. Maybe it's two pair because there's pair on the board, but no, the Jack Nine of Spades is there's just something about it.
So you haven't won like a huge pot before in a really memorable spot. It's just one that you like to play.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. It's one that you can often play. In a short stack tournament like this, it of course is not quite as interesting to play, but when you are more deep stacked, it's one you can often convince yourself to get after it with. But yeah, I'm sure it could have been that I had it in a hand long time ago, but not one that I remember now.
Taking a look at the payouts again, as we mentioned, first place prize is $10,000. Second is 5K, and all the way down to ninth is $500. And we are still a few players away from kind of even being in that soft bubble where, you know, the bubble is basically the spot before the money, and then the soft bubble is kind of the play that happens when we're 2 to 3 players away from the money, when you start needing to be cognizant of that fact, and it's going to be reflected in the way that you play depending on your stack size. So if you have a huge stack size approaching the soft bubble, then you are going to be able to take advantage and chip up a lot easier. But if you are a shorter stack, you kind of have to hang back and start, you know, hoping that other players get eliminated before you.
Exactly. I'm seeing we also have a giveaway going in the chat currently. So you should be seeing in the chat function on YouTube the option for a giveaway where you'll have a question. I believe it's a form of trivia question to answer, and you can email your response to campus@sig.com. That's campus@sig.com with your answer in the next few minutes. I believe it was posted a minute or two ago, so you still have a couple of minutes to hit that up. Of course,
Yep.
I'm realizing how the stream works and the fact that we're on a delay, but you, of course, have been in the situation before, so hopefully my instructions are correct.
Yeah, I think if they post it in chat, then it is synced up to our commentator real time. So hopefully everybody still has some time to put in an answer. And the prize is a Susquehanna t-shirt, which I am modeling currently, and a deck of playing cards.
I have many a decks of playing cards with Susquehanna logos from my time at the firm. I probably have, I don't know, 11 or 12 different configurations at this point. They are a very popular gift, of course, to college students, but also, just to friends and family. Always nice to have a good deck of cards to play with.
So how often are you playing poker with your colleagues? Like you have some obviously, you know, organized in-house tournaments, but is there just kind of like a Friday night situation where everybody's done with work and you just go into some common area and you're like, hey, let's just play a quick poker game before we all go home?
So I will say caveat with I am one of the poker instructors at the firm. So for interns and for new grads and new hires in our trading division, I will play poker with them once or twice a week after trading hours. So after my sort of day-to-day trading job, and we'll play a couple of different variations of poker, but really it's just intended as a kind of teaching tool and as a way, like we've spoken about before, to try to model the world in these probabilistic ways and figuring out how to make positive expectancy decisions. So I as a poker instructor do that again once or twice a week with interns or new grads and new hires, but otherwise people at the firm, it varies a little bit. I think a lot of traders or people in my role who are older or younger, they when they start, they're often pretty enthusiastic. They're getting into poker. They're playing various poker games, and then I think it's pretty typical to have a bit of the journey that I'm having, which is I played a lot of poker in college. I played a good amount of poker in my first year or two with the firm, but because poker and trading are relatively similar, sometimes it feels like I don't need to overload my brain with like that type of thinking. And if I'm hanging out with my friends, I might choose to do something else. That said, I still go to the casino certainly occasionally, but I think the like weekly or even daily games that we were playing when I was an intern have certainly gone down in frequency as I think people have um, you know realized that the trading is so similar in terms of the part of your brain you're using.
Yeah. So so would you say that there's like what is something that you do after work that you think actually like
All right,
helps
we go.
you
Be under 600.
take a step away from what you do day to day? Like a fun game, but something that is totally different in nature
A fun game that's totally different in nature. Um,
that you enjoy.
that I enjoy. So I say a fun game. It's totally different in nature. I like playing some relatively low skill board games. So, um, of course, at a firm like Susquehanna, you have a lot of people who are very interested in board games and particularly the ones that are, more intriguing as we see Abe and David here after a little break, rebalancing the tables, getting down to 12 or 11 players, or 13 perhaps. We see Abe and David getting it all in with the ace nine versus the ace king. And
Ooh.
Abe staying alive in these all-in situations so far makes top two pair versus the ace king suited.
Oh wow. And it's
I think we got your. Oh, actually,
it's
no.
pretty much
It's
the
a
nail
little
in the
too much here.
coffin
Ace is
here for the
600.
ace king, but luckily David is not the one all in.
That's actually about here. 70-50.
It took me a second, but yeah, I see what you're saying. There is, I guess,
A
one out
chop.
for the for the chop there,
Yeah.
if the ace had come. But to finish my answer, I think sometimes, playing some of these more involved board games, Agricola comes to mind as a firm favorite. I don't know if you've ever played it, but it's a fun game.
Is it 400?
I think those, again, like poker, can be a little bit too involved. So I like playing um, some games like Ticket to Ride is a favorite of mine that is
Thank
really
you. I was
it's
gonna
yeah, go ahead.
I no, I enjoy Ticket to Ride, and when you said low skill board games, I was like, that might be my speed because I don't like, when I'm not playing poker, I want to play something where I don't have to use that part of my brain too. But I love Ticket to Ride.
Ticket to Ride is great. It's one of those where you can really play with anyone and everyone, and certainly I've played games where I have a few friends back in Sweden where I was born and raised, where we would play and it would get fairly serious, but you can also play it, with your 10-year-old if you have kids, and you can play it with your grandparents, and it's not that uh, sort of serious, so to speak. You can definitely tailor it to your audience. So, do you play the base map?
Yes.
Very nice. I've played a few various now. I like the European one. Perhaps being European, that shouldn't be
Hmm.
a surprise, but
Looks like Hamon goes all in here with Ace Jack and gets folds all around. Taking a look at current chip counts for the featured table, we've got Drew here up top with 12 big blinds and Abe all the way at the bottom with just around 2.5 big blinds. And so, as you can see, just very shallow stack sizes. Again, this structure specifically tailored so that it can end in a certain allotted amount of time. But, typically when we play tournaments and when we get down to, you know, 12, 13 players getting close to the money, you will see kind of deeper stack sizes that allows for a little bit more play. But here, these players are really going to need to find some good hands to go all in with soon.
yeah, I think we might be close to the bubble here with the secondary table being low on players as well. But yeah, so far certainly players are not wanting to risk it being so close to the final nine. So we see it folds to David here with the ace jack, and he is going to risk it all in the small blind. Of course, you only have to get through one more player, and there's not only your small blind but also their big blind in there. So a lot of chips to play for, and it's getting close to having prices being dealt out soon here, but still a long ways away from the top price of 10,000.
Yeah, and it's not just about the prize money. There's certainly a little bit of bragging rights associated with just making the final table. Sometimes the final table isn't even, the prize money yet. Sometimes the final table might only pay out 3 spots, 5 spots, 6 spots. And so just being able to say that you made it to the last table in a multi table tournament is certainly an achievement in and of itself.
Absolutely. James is thinking about it here. Abe is with the 2400, sorry, 2100 is going to put in his 2.5 big blinds, and James, of course, with the ace queen is thinking that he has a good hand to contend with. So Abe is, I think he's held up in what have you seen?
I
4 or 5
mean,
all-ins?
will the horseshoe fall out, Anders?
I don't know. Some backdoor help here potential, but it's ace queen is still in the lead. Now some chop opportunities, perhaps?
Yeah,
No?
definitely some more outs to chop, but 5 of clubs is not one of them. And Abe, valiant effort, survived a lot of all-ins, but is eliminated. And now now the claps get a little more intense. They get a
You're
little
right.
louder, right? Because we're getting closer. We're getting closer.
I think that might have actually put us down to 9. We will see how they handle the dealing here, but that is what I'm hearing on the side. I think they're pausing for a minute just to check. It's either down to 9 or down to 10.
Yeah, and traditionally, poker is played 9-handed, but of course, you can go up to having 10 players at a table if need be. So when we end up consolidating for the final players, I believe it's going to be at 9.
Exactly. And I realize here that I'm not used to the delay as much as you are, so the fact that we have another hand being played here makes sense, as we were at six players at this table, so should have had at least 5 on the other one. So we've got still adjusting to the fact that I'm living in the past, so to speak, commentating on a delay.
Yeah, and of course, the delay is instituted just to make sure we protect the game integrity, of course, because this being live streamed, we don't want anybody having access to whole card information. Sometimes
Right.
people like to ask, the commentators, like, is this the first time you're seeing the hand then? Do you already know what happens? No, we are watching the feed as if it is happening in real time. So we do not already know. We did not know that Abe was going to get lucky, 3 all-ins in a row. We did not know the outcome of those hands. We're seeing it at the same time that you are.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is important. I mean, it's hard to react in real time if you knew what was going to happen, you know? So the fact that we are at the edge of our seats, similar to all our viewers, is certainly makes sense. Hamong here with a decision. You know, the 2-9 is a classic hand that is not the best, but not the worst. And you're getting down. You're not that deep stacked, but you know that there aren't that many players left, and you maybe want to make the final table. So you're in a tough spot here, I think.
Yeah, I think it's important to just understand the value of a medium pair. It's a made hand, and of course, a lot of times you will find yourself up against 2 overcards, just like he is here against David. But it is still kind of the risk you want to take, especially when you have, the covering stack that makes it an even better proposition. Here we see, though, David does have him slightly covered, but Hamong's still willing to take the risk here with pocket nines.
Yeah, and I think that, speaks a bit to how these players got here, is they had to maneuver through a, 80 to 110 player tournament in their respective cities. And I was actually the tournament director at the tournament where Hamong made it through. And you have to get lucky in some spots, but you also have to be able to maneuver and try to get a little more risky when you think it's warranted. Of course, here for Hmong, it does not look like it's going to play out for him, but a valiant effort. Valiant effort. Hmong just slightly shorter stacked than that all in, and we go down to 4 players at the feature table, which means we should either get another player being rebalanced in, or we are down to 9. So we're gonna wait for the tournament director just to sort that out, make sure we get the appropriate number of players at the table.
Anders, it kind of blends in with the feed, but I'm just now noticing that in the top right-hand corner, it says 10 players of 16 remaining. So that's some good
That's
info.
right.
We could have wish we noticed it sooner, but hey, this is a live stream. We figured it out. We got it now. So now,
Exactly.
we're we're going to continue on until there are 9 players, and then we will consolidate to one final table where we're going to get to meet some of the other players that we haven't seen from the other table.
Yeah, I think we are waiting here perhaps to get a rebalance. So if we're 10 players left, that means the other table has 6. So to make sure everything is fair, both tables should play with a relatively similar amount of players. So I think they're just waiting to see if they can bring in another player. I realize we've lost now a couple of players almost down to the final table. Among the latest to go out, and I'm checking his bio and I'm seeing his best poker is how long he's been playing poker, which I remember from playing with him. He's saying only 5 months. He learned to play the night before the New York City tournament, which I remember he talked about when I met him in New York a couple of months ago, and he played strong then to finish in the top 4. I want to say he may have actually finished first in that one. I believe at least in the top 2, and of course not as lucky today, losing the 2 nines versus the king 10 with a king on the flop, and going out in 11th place.
Yeah, what a great showing though for someone who's only been playing poker for 5 months. And I feel like poker is one of those games where I think once you have like a semi decent result early on, you just get hooked. It's so easy to just fall in love with this game. It's such a beautiful game. But once you kind of get a taste of what it feels like to go deep in a tournament, or to have your first cash, it's just so exciting from there.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about tournament play. Of course, there are other formats of poker, cash and in no limit hold'em. Of course, the 100 big blind or 200 big blind is the standard formats across casinos. But we've talked mostly about tournaments, and I'm picking up that maybe tournaments is your favorite format. Is that right? Or
You know, I yes, but I think it's also because it's I've spent the most time learning and perfecting tournament strategy that it just naturally makes it my favorite format. I feel like from a lifestyle perspective, I enjoy cash more because you can come and go as you please. But there is something that just can't be replicated, the feeling of being the last person standing in a tournament, though, that you don't necessarily get even when you win a big pot in a cash game. And so, yeah, I do love tournaments, but uh, tournament strategy versus cash game strategy is very, very different. And so, once you put so much time and energy kind of focusing on one format, you definitely just want to keep sticking with it because it can be very difficult to transition in and out of the strategy you need for some of that deeper stacked play that you don't really get in tournaments as often.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but we've seen just throughout this tournament how the players started out with 50 big blinds on average, and of course, as the blinds have risen, and players have gotten knocked out, the average chip stack has gotten smaller again relative to the blind, such that you start playing at 50 big blinds deep, then you maybe play at 30 big blinds deep, you go down to 10 big blinds. It of course varies throughout a tournament, but um, it um, it provides for so much variability, which I agree with you. I think it's a fascinating part of it. Cash games are a little bit more perhaps structured in the sense that you're very likely to have a similar situation. Every time you're on the button, everyone else has 100 big blinds or more. But in a tournament, you're on the button, you have 10 big blinds, but the small blind has six and the big blind has 14. Your strategy there might be very different to if the small blind has 40 and the big blind has four. And so incorporating all those things in real time is, of course, something that makes tournaments really, really beautiful, as you say, and certainly um, makes it a lot of fun to try to figure out each little problem that you face playing tournaments.
Yeah, I think the amount of adjustments that you have to be making on the fly is just, an astronomical number that I think people don't really think about. They think that we're, just playing the same situation in tournaments, and that's just really not the case. And so, again, there's just so many different formats of poker for people to enjoy, and this is just one of them. But I definitely encourage people to kind of explore all the formats and also all the other variants of poker. Texas Hold'em is the most popular, but there's so many other forms of poker that are so fun. I think a lot of people might be interested in something like a draw game, like Deuce to Seven triple draw is a lot of fun. And, there's also stud and Omaha. I know people love Omaha because you get four cards and it's more fun the more cards you have. So certainly a lot to explore in the world of poker.
Exactly, and that's part of the reason why we play a couple of different games here at the office, kind of with the interns and the new grads. Just giving them a taste a little bit of what you might find out there in the wild. Um, as we look back to the table, we're back in action. We've got a new player who got rebalanced in from the secondary table, and both players with really big hands and big stacks, the two almost biggest stacks of the table. And I think we're gonna see Drew here with some aggression take down a pot pre-flop with Shikar coming in with the biggest stack at the table and not really want to go up against it for all the marbles with the two queens. So of course, Drew, the beneficiary of some aggression there, willing to risk it all with the jacks and getting a better hand to fold.
Yeah, and you kind of see that reflects a little bit of maybe Drew's strategy is, when his tournament life was on the line, he didn't want to call it off with jacks. But now that he has a bigger stack, he feels more comfortable applying pressure. And that's definitely one of those adjustments that you should be making, right? If it's not your tournament life on the line, then you want to be the person putting the pressure on everybody else.
Yeah, and I think it's impressive that he, chose to do it even with a new player at the table, because of course we've talked about how over time you build reads, you try to figure out, does my opponent play a little bit tighter, a little bit looser? Do they play too many hands? Do they play a pretty snug, few only good hands? And Drew in that spot decided that I haven't really seen Shikar play, but I'm gonna try to risk it to pick up both the blinds, of course, and Shikar's race, and it worked out. James with a little table talk here.
Yeah, and that's definitely one element of poker that I think, is really fun in the live arena is just being able to have table talk, not only for the social aspect, but definitely from a strategy perspective. For people who watch a lot of poker on TV, they might see, some of your favorite players might be the most talkative ones, the ones like Daniel Negreanu that's trying to get a read on you, trying to see if you give off any information while you're in a hand. And a lot of that, I think is a soft skill that people maybe underestimate or don't realize is a tool that players will use to their advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one where, for these players, some of them might have more experience, some of them might have less, some of them might have only played for 6 months. The the ability to try to incorporate that and maybe, a little bit of chatter sometimes. Like sometimes you might feel like, well, if I'm not the best at it, maybe other people pick up things when I talk. So sometimes it feels easiest just to kind of keep quiet and not risk anything by saying things. Um, but it's nerve-wracking, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't talk very much at the table. I did like if I've played at a certain casino for many months and I've started to get comfortable, I'll certainly kind of explore that avenue. But otherwise, I generally am not quite that comfortable getting involved in the table talk. But how do you
Yeah.
feel? Do you engage, or does it depend on the situation?
I have very selective table talk. So when Daniel talks to me, I never answer. But when I feel like I'm much more in control of the situation and I have a lot more experience than my opponent, then I'm definitely happy to get in there with the table talk if I feel like I can glean more information than I give away. It's always, again, a risk reward proposition. Like, talking, is this going to help me get the information I need, or am I going to somehow be costing myself by giving away something and trying to engage in this spot? So everything is just, weighing out that risk. But Daniel, I know better. So
No, that's very fair. I think again that kind of probabilistic thinking of, will would me talking here, in expectancy gain me, chips or gain me dollars if we're at a cash game. That's it's a real question. And again, similar analogy to trading where you really have to kind of figure out, especially if you are engaging sort of with a trade where you see a trade come in and you're deciding, should I do this trade? It's like positive expectancy. Like if I'm playing against this player and I think it's Daniel Negreanu, I think there might be better than me. Maybe I'll want to pass. But if I think that I perhaps have more experience or more skill, I'll take that kind of positive expectancy bet. So certainly some similarities here as we see the players, still on the bubble here. Sean with the shortest stack at our feature table. But I think we're down to 10, the next player out, which I guess with some clapping here, we might have broken the bubble as I speak of it. I think that indicates that the other secondary table just lost a player, meaning that we are likely down to 9 players here. But of course, we will see how this hand plays out first. But I believe that is what the clapping relates to.
well, and it's almost nice to go into this hand knowing that you are in the money, so that no matter what happens in this hand, what if David happened to be all in? At least he feels secure in the fact that he has locked up that ninth place prize of $500. But and this is a spot where David might lose some chips with Shakar here having top pair against David's second pair of nines.
I certainly agree. It's not the most exciting situation, especially against a new player at the table. So James just decides to wait for another spot here. And I think we will have, again, a little bit of a break as we rebalance the tables and get down to 9 players.
Yeah, we'll also color up. And this will be
I'm
Well, and
gonna go ahead.
I think it's just a good time, I think, during this reset for all the players to take stock of not only what they have in their stack, but where every other player ranks in terms of stack and where they're seated at the table once we get down to one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you'll have, again, some reads on the other players, and you might want to start thinking about who should I, play a little bit looser against and who should I play a little tighter versus. But yeah, I think very, very well played so far from all our players who have now locked up. I believe it is $500 a piece, with, of course, still a lot of prices to play for. And we will see if they do a little seat draw for tables. I'm actually going to take this opportunity to run on a quick break and grab another water. But of course, I'll be back with you shortly.
Yes, we will go on a quick break as all of these players combine down to one final table, and we will be back in a few minutes.
Here's 1,000. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1,000. Here's 1,000.
1600 in.
Don't worry about it. We got you.
I think. Would you also mind like bringing in a couple more blacks?
Yep, we got it.
Filling up my tank.
1, 2, 3. Technically, that's just another yellow there. where's it at? We already did it. It's already gone.
Yep. Now, let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 500, 10, 15, 20.
I gave him to Chris Malfatone. 4,000?
4 and 4, perfect.
Yeah. 500 for each stack, right?
Yep.
8 stacks.
Did you guys draw for button, or did you guys draw for seats already? No. Okay.
Oh my god. We all good?
Yep, you can take all those off play.
We're redrawing the whole table, right?
Yes, both, everybody.
Yeah, everyone's getting a new seat.
Alright, so everyone's getting new seats.
You got a 12% chance of getting the same seat.
Win 9, right? Yeah. What if we had like a Mr. Beast kind of thing here? We get offered like some money to leave.
You're next to me for the first card.
Yeah, somebody. It's the first
You can change your suit. You're sitting down already. You get the next card. There you go.
7. Are you a 7? I'm 6. This is 7.
Next, Sean.
So we got these the ones up there. If we can, like, let's just keep them on.
6. 5. Yeah,
You gotta take a call.
Yeah, if you're at the final table, please get a new seat card. If you have your seat card already, you're able to now go to the bathroom. We really
Put your name tag on your seat. We're gonna do exact chip counts while you guys are gone.
You're 4. 87?
Be quick because we're on a time crunch with Maria Hull. What seat are you at?
Table 1, seat 3.
C3's right here. C4's right here. So go ahead and just put it on the felt right in front of you. We'll do your chip counts for you and be ready to go when you're back. Everybody's guaranteed $500?
Not that deep.
this table, yeah.
Not that deep.
Alright.
300.
Top 3 will also go to the chat.
Can we go around and tell these people's names?
And we'll ship this to you.
Where's Sean at? It'll be easier.
I can do the second seat.
Sean?
Sean's next.
Do we know who's in seat 1?
We are actually going to ship everyone that plays in the top 16.
Who was it? So
A what? Everyone gets a focus set even if you like
What
didn't
seat
make
is
it
you
in.
at? 8?
That's so sick.
Drew, can you please put your, he's seat 8.
Who's number 1? Who's seat 1?
Yeah, can you put
Where's
your name
James
tags down
at?
like Eric asked for? We have a couple in the bathroom.
What seat is James at?
On C4, sorry.
James?
Alright, and Shakar? Seat
7.
7. Alright, those are the people that were at the final table. So the people that were at the feature table, who are the 5 that came in? One seat is,
William is seat
where's
9.
David at?
Yeah, that's
David,
right.
you're in the 9 seat?
What seat?
Thank you, bro.
Alright, so where's the 1 seat at? Or what's
Here,
the
but
name
he's
of
in the
one
bathroom. He's in the bathroom.
What's
It must be Sean.
Nobody knows
seat? Oh,
who
okay, he took his name. Alright. Who's in the 2 seat?
2 seat is Benjamin
Which one?
K.
What's the last name?
Okay.
Kuoch.
I just need the case. Alright, and who's in the 3 seat? Name?
Manvel.
Monvel, M-A-N-V-E-L, and I have 3,800.
Oh, Montel, I thought
We have 3,800.
No, this is my poker card.
Oh, okay. Chip protector?
Yep.
3,800.
Oh, you're behind me?
And about
Yep.
3,800.
Oh, this is
How much does James have in the 4
It was
seat?
it was actually something I got for my friend's
James, how
birthday, and
much
then
do
he
you
gives it to me when I need some more.
Wait, sorry, let me just count it.
Please count your chip stacks so, and
Quickly.
then, yeah.
I think 16-7 for Benjamin.
In the 2 seat?
I think so.
Alright,
You let him double check that
we'll
one.
verify.
We have the 1 seat. You have the chip count for the 1 seat.
I do not. I don't.
6.7?
James, how much is it?
6.7.
6,700. Alright, perfect. And 5 seat, what's your name?
William
Is that 5? Yeah.
G.
And chip count?
2.1.
What did I put on, when I took you, when I asked you for your name, was it Will?
Yeah, sorry, Will. Will
Alright,
G.
there we go.
Yeah.
I found you.
Thank
And
you.
how much is it?
2.1.
2,100. And Sean, in the 6 seat, how many chips do you have?
So the 1 seed looks like it's 12, 13, 14, 4.
2.9.
2,900, Sean?
Yeah.
Perfect. And what is, can somebody count Shakar for me?
What's he at?
He's in the 7 seat.
I got him.
And Drew, 11-4.
Yes. You have
And
David's?
David's,
Let me count David's.
I'm gonna go with 7,300 of course.
I don't know. Double check me. 5,000. 10,000.
Alright, perfect.
11, 12, 13. That's 20, that's 2,000. 15,000. 15,000? Seat cards from
15,000
if you're
flat,
done.
that's what I have, so that's good. Alright.
So now we're just waiting for seat one.
Drop it
I don't
off,
wanna
Bill,
look at
give me a
myself.
second.
What do you need?
Dude, I've been dealing with this like.
This is a terrible scene. You gotta stare yourself looking like a fool.
I'll actually do this one.
Are they showing cards on the stream? You know?
After like 10 minutes, like delay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But yeah, they see everything just like you do on TV. Like it looks percentages, outs get all printed
Oh,
out,
great.
and all that kind of
That's
stuff. I'm
cool.
pretty sure. I mean, like, that's.
Seat one, what's your name?
Cool setup.
Seat one,
I think
Sarva.
I'm sure you'll be able. I'm
Yes,
sure
I
you'll
need
be
to.
able
Yeah.
How do you show percentages if you don't know the card?
Yes.
How do you show percentages?
First ace is the button.
No, it knows the cards.
Oh, alright.
You looking for percentages up here? Like, oh, I'm only 30. I can probably not call it.
That's
One's in the seat, thank you.
that is bad.
As a reminder, please no phones out on the table.
Be the one you want from the live stream.
6-12. Perfect. that works.
All right, anyone who hasn't been here, I'm gonna need to make sure we get to that little blue square. That's where the cards need to be red. So, right, the cards need to go over that blue square. So don't have your chips in front of it or blocking it. I'm gonna be whipping them at you at about 30 miles an hour.
And I was gonna warn you guys, somewhere around 4 o'clock, I might have to start switching to like 10-minute blind instead of 12 minutes. I just really want to be done by 5 o'clock.
You guys gotta go all in immediately on everything.
I'm trying not to do it, just see how it goes. But,
You all will win cash from this.
yeah, you are at this point.
You're
You
all
are all
getting
winners, not just in my book, but like in the cash.
You're all in.
Is clock supposed to be going? Or
Yeah.
Yes.
okay, okay, great.
Oh, we're going?
Okay.
Here we go.
I have a
Where's
deck.
the-
I have a deck of cards to give to the first person that raises their hand. I think you'll see it. From Neil Patrick Harris. They have like a puzzle component.
All right,
It's like-
we're back from a quick break, and we see the players have taken their seats here at the official final table. 9 players left to go, and we see we have Atarva, Ben, and so forth. Do you want to do a quick introductions, maybe, Maria, of the players who made it to our final table as they get started here?
Yeah, definitely. Let's give them some flowers here for just making it to the final table. All right, so in seat 1 we have Atarva. He has 14,400 in chips, and we've quite a bit of him as he was a player on the original feature table. Just got off to a really hot start today. And in seat 2 we have Ben K, who we haven't seen much of as he was on the other table, but he is actually coming in as our chip leader with 16,700 in chips. In seat 3 we've got Manvel, and he is one of our short stacks with 3,800, so not a whole lot of playability in his stack, just about 3 big blinds for him. And in seat 4 we've got James, who we've also been familiar with from his play at the feature table from the start, and definitely somebody that I think we should keep our eye on, someone who has been willing to get involved and pretty active. He has about a middling stack of 6,700 chips, so that's kind of the stack size where you're going to be able to, you know, do a little something with, but you do want to stay out of the way of the big stack. We will take a pause for this action, though, as we see we got pocket aces here in Atarva's hand.
Yeah. Shikar opened pre-flop and got 3-bet to a minimum size of 3,600, and Shikar came along, and of course Atarva here with aces on a relatively safe board, puts in a continuation bet, and Shikar contemplating his options here with the ace high and the backdoor flush draw, but we haven't seen so much kind of continued aggression, I think. So Shakar wisely here lets it go. And we can get back to introductions. So we just talked about James, who we'd seen some of on the feature table already. In seat 5, I believe we have Will comes in with a relatively small stack. I think he is just in the under the gun position here, about to pay the blinds. So he's gonna have to get something going quick here to move up the standings.
Yeah, and then we have Sean in seat 6 with also a short stack of just 2,900 in chips. Just again, hasn't really gotten many big hands. We've seen him throughout the day just not be able to play post very often. Really only saw him get involved, once or twice with some decent holdings. So definitely has his work cut out for him. And in seat 7, we have Shakar, who, just moved over before we reached this official final table. He was somebody who we haven't seen so much of, but has been kind of involved in the last couple hands as of late, the one right before we went to break as well. So we will see what he wants to do kind of with his bigger stack. It's just one of those where you do have to be careful of where you are sitting relative to the stacks that are bigger than yours. You definitely want to have a good position on the big stacks. And Shakar, definitely seems comfortable so far, though, at the table. And in C8, we have Drew, who's just folding King 10 here from under the gun +1. He's the person who I'm going to give best dressed of the day award to. They're all wearing the same kind of zip up, but we all like it when someone can add a little individual flair. So rocking the penguin kind of hat over there, and he's got 11,400. We saw him, get a little aggressive with those jacks, getting queens to fold, and just making good decisions. I would say that he's been very measured in the way that he has approached today's play. And finally, we have David in seat 9 with 7,300 chips, and David, who is holding ace jack suited here, just again has been somebody who I think has just, pick and chose his spots well throughout, which is something you have to do because, again, when the structure moves really fast, you can't really afford to play too loose and get involved in too many hands, and you do want to be smart about your hand selection. But here we've got Manvel folding here in the hijack. And action is going to be folded around to the blinds, and is Sean going to give? Yeah.
Exactly. He gets the walk, which is always welcome when you're in the big blind. I'm curious how you handle it. Usually when I'm in the big blind, I don't even look at my cards. I don't want to know that everyone folded when I had aces, but of course we can see what they have in this case. But always nice to get a walk, I think. Certainly when you're so short stacked.
For sure. And, I think it's definitely a negative free roll to look at your cards before it's your turn in general, let alone when you get a walk. I think, you don't want to really, give something off, but also it's important to be watching your opponents, look at their hands. And sometimes if you look at your hands very quickly and you already have decided mentally what your action's going to be, you could be telegraphing that action to the other players who have yet to act. And also, you never want to look down and see that you got to walk with aces because it just feels bad.
Especially if your favorite hand is aces.
True. Yeah, for you it would be, Jack 9 suited. Don't give the man a walk when he has Jack 9 suited.
Exactly. Drew here getting to play his big blind for free, of course, with the 8 deuce. Not looking good in this hand. Atarva playing a little bit slow, called pre-flop, and then checking both. Of course, he is putting in the aggression after he got Drew to stab on the turn and gets the extra 1,200 chips there with Drew, of course, throwing away the 8 deuce offsuit pretty quickly. But now I think it's gonna get interesting. These stacks are so short, and I think players are gonna start looking at those pay jumps and thinking, well, if I fold now, maybe someone else will go all in. But on the flip side of that, if I go all in and everyone folds, now I can really pick up a lot of those blinds and perhaps make a run for a top, 1, 2, 3 finish. So we will see how people approach it here.
Yeah, and I think that, we reached a stage of the tournament where, there's some other considerations that we haven't been able to talk about too much. And, I'm not going to go too in depth about it, but, at this stage, you want to be making decisions based on what we call ICM, which is known as the independent chip model. And that's basically just a mathematical model that we use in tournaments to estimate our equity and other players' equity based on their chip stack and assign a dollar value. Because earlier when we were playing with these chips, they were just tournament chips and they did not have any real cash value assigned to it yet. But now that we are at this stage, we see how much is in the prize pool, how much is left in the prize pool as players get eliminated, and then we're able to figure out, what our equity and what our, dollar value of our chip stack is, and that will help us kind of guide the decisions that we make. But this is also really interesting because the curious part of it is you can actually make money by folding sometimes, which is kind of what we alluded to earlier about just laddering, as you see in these chip counts, just how shallow the stacks are and how bunched up they are on the bottom. There's really going to be a lot of value in just outlasting the person with a slightly shorter stack than you. So, there's a part of the tournament where you might want to have your foot on the gas and you might want to be playing a lot of hands and you're accumulating chips. But then this is a part of the game where, depending on your stack size, you might have to slow down, and it might actually behoove you to be folding and to be playing less hands and to not get involved. And so, definitely something that we want people to be aware of as, hey, look, Manvel got your memo. He also apparently has the same favorite hand as you do.
I think this is too easy. Jack 9 suited versus ace 8 offsuit. I'm rooting for Manuel here. Nothing against Shikar, but if Manuel's playing the Jack 9 of spades, I have to root that way. And of course we see an all-in and a call here. So Manuel, the first player at risk. Manuel from Glendale, California, whose best poker advice is very short and sweet. Do not tilt.
And clearly, the equities are way off here because Manvel's like an 80% favorite with Jack 9 here.
Oh, I agree. I mean, look at that flop. This is why you play Jack 9 of spades right there.
Got some straight draw outs, some flush draw outs. Not a lot going. You could make a pair with a jack or a 9. I mean, let's just prove Anders right here, and let's just bring a river that really makes.
No. The Jack
Well,
9 of spades.
you might have to rethink your favorite hand, Anders.
Yeah, that's it's a tough way to start the final table. Jack 9 of spades immediately into the muck for losing the hand. But honestly, of course, what very well done for Manvel to get here. Decided to risk it with his last 3600 with a very high big blind and couldn't quite get it to get the card to go his way, even with the beautiful flop with both the straight draw and the flush draw that you mentioned. But with that, we have our first cash. Manvel takes $500 for his troubles, and we're down to 8 players. And again, those players are going to start looking at those payouts and realizing that it could be theirs. When you're start at the start of the day and you have the same amount of chips as everyone else, and there's 16 players, you dream a little bit. But now that you're down to 8 players, you've outlasted half. You just need to get a little bit further.
Yeah, it definitely makes it more real. And the interesting part about kind of, looking at what the payout structure is that it's basically 2x second place prize is what first place is. And so, with that big gap between how much money you can make between second and first, you really kind of, when you get shorter, you might want to play more aggressively because of that, and so it'll be interesting to kind of see people maybe change their strategies based on the payout structure as well. That's always something you want to keep note of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's relatively flat to start, I believe, with the same kind of pay jump for the next 2 spots. 8th will get 750, 7th will get 1,000, 6th will get 1,250, and so forth. So for the next few, it's difference is only 250, but exactly when you start getting into, first, second, and third, then the difference in placing first and second are more substantial and more significant. So we will certainly see how the players handle it as we move forward. But I think for now the focus is on these really short stacks who, like you said, will have to look over and see, when am I paying the big blind next? Does it make sense for me to go in with this hand or that hand, based on where the other short stacks are?
Yeah, and definitely another thing you want to pay attention to is, if you have a short stack and you are pondering whether or not this hand is going to be good enough to go all in, you also want to look and see who's the most likely person that's going to call you, and that would be the person in the big blind. And if the person in the big blind also has a shorter stack, and it's going to be, riskier for them to call you because it represents a more significant portion of their chips to call your all in, then that might be a spot that you might want to choose a bit of a wider range to go all in with versus shoving into the chip leader in the big blind.
Right. We have one of those all-ins that we just talked about with Will saying, you know what, I would have to pay the big blind next, and I think Jack 9 offsuit is going to be my best bet, as opposed to waiting to basically be forced all in the big blind. So he's going to run it out versus James here, and he flops a Jack right away. Great spot to double up for Will if he can hold up here.
Yeah, James is down to just 3 kings left in the deck.
And Will makes 2 pair here to double up. Will, originally from Denver, Colorado, whose best poker advice is showing some affinity for the pits, saying always hit on 16.
Okay, I can get on board with that. I mean, when you first said always hit on 17, I was like, okay, maybe not. But 16, yes. Stay consistent. That's all I say.
Yes.
Like, I'm not one of those people that will get annoyed with a stranger that sits down at the blackjack table and wants to, go off book. That's fine, but just stay consistent. I don't want you like hitting on 16 one hand and then the very next hand not hitting on 16. That will make me leave and go to another table. I'm never mean to anybody, but like, you will know when I get up in the middle of a really good shoe that like I think you're playing terribly.
That makes a lot of sense. William, also one of our newest players, has played poker for about a month before the qualifier. So certainly see what he can do here. Of course, he's paying the big blind here, a big portion of his stack. But with the 5-3 offsuit, you never know what the flop is going to give. Here, Shikar, of course, flops a monster with a set of 4s, a set standing for 3 of a kind in this case, and everyone else, of course, not having that much to compete with in this spot. And as Shikar takes this one down, we are about to do another giveaway, I'm being told, meaning you guys can keep an eye out in the YouTube chat for a link where if you answer the question correctly and email it to our campus@sig.com email address, you can have a chance to win a Susquehanna Yeti. So keep an eye out for the chat, and again, please email at campus@sig.com with your answers.
All right, we're gonna have to like work on how they're looking at their cards a little bit. Like, the whole pickup method is fine, but maybe sometimes somebody behind you could see what you're holding, and you just never know if that information can get out. So keep the cards on the table, but it's okay. We're having fun. It's a casual day here, but don't try it at home.
No, it's certainly something that will come up if you play with, here it's a friendly game, of course. That's not a concern. But if you're in a casino and you hold your cards up to too high up in front of your face. You never know who might be standing behind you and taking a little peek. Here, no one flops everything I was about to say, but Atarva actually comes out with a little dangler, a little pair of threes here, and he's gonna bet and take it down. Now, very interesting here with, I believe, both Shikar. I'm sorry, he's gonna come along trying to make a pair on the turn. I believe two of our players in the blinds here, Sean and Will, both. Sean, of course, posted the big blind. Will called the small blind. They are both going to be relatively short stacked coming out of this. So we'll see how that plays out over the next hand or two. Here we see Shikar being rewarded with an 8 on the river. Atarva checked back the turn, checks back the river, and is going to get the bad news with his opponent having rivered a pair of 8s. Shikar rocketing up the chip stacks. That was a pot of several thousand, putting him firmly in first with a whopping 20 big blinds at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for Shikar to just start opening a lot wider and just being really aggressive with his stack. Just, again, going back to VPIP, you know, this is a situation, given how short everybody is, that you can definitely start, you know, raising a lot more hands per round, but also just remembering that some of these shorter stacks don't have fold equity, but they also are just being dealt 2 random cards, right? And they're going to be forced in. So, you know, you don't have to be too weary about that, especially because you are only risking sometimes, you know, 2 big blinds at most against some of these players.
Exactly. I mean, we see a lot of players with very short stacks where, as you say, the big blind is such a big proportion of their stack that if you have a lot of chips, you can put a lot of pressure on everyone to have to play pretty snug, you know, with these really tight players. So Shikar here doesn't even have to put any more money in. He is just gonna flip a coin with the small blind here, Sean, who, you know, had put in 1,000, only had 300 left, and is now all in for 1,300 versus the 7-5 of Shikar.
And Sean finds trips on the flop. So trips are when there's 2 on the board and 1 in your hand, whereas a set is when you have a pair in your hand and there's 1 on the board. Improves to a full house on the river, and the short stack will double up here.
Yeah, it makes it tough. I mean, we saw, I think it was James on the button in this previous hand with the I believe it was Ace-7 offsuit, who decided to just look for a better spot. I mean, that's one of those spots where you're sitting on just 6,000 chips, but you're saying, hey, the small blind is basically all in. I can just fold. Maybe, you know, 50% of the time, the small blind is going to get eliminated, and I get to move up a spot on that payout ladder to lock in a little bit more money instead of risking it all right here with a okay hand, which of course Ace-7 is. Not a great hand, but an okay hand. So it does put a lot of pressure on those middling stacks, Atarva, Drew, James, when there are some players who are really short.
Yeah, definitely the shortest stacks, you know, on one hand, you don't really have fold equity, but on the other hand, you have the least to lose, right? In terms of ICM, you really don't have the same considerations that a middling stack will have, because, you know, most of the time you are going to finish, you know, in the place that your chip stack designates. But for the middling stacks, they actually have the ability to perhaps finish in the top 2 or top 3 spots. But what would be really disastrous is if they ended up finishing, you know, 8th or 7th or 6th. And so, you know, they're really going to want to avoid action if at all possible.
Yeah, and here we're gonna get to see how Ben navigates this flop. You know, seeing a pretty big pot here, and he has, you know, 9,600 behind. It's gonna be a side pot, I believe, of something to the order of 8,000, or a main pot of 8,000, and then a side pot of about 6,000, where Shikar, sitting with pocket tens, decided to just call pre-flop, and now Ben and Shikar are gonna have action on the flop. So very, very big spot here for both players. Ben, of course, came into this hand with the second biggest chip stack. So not really what you want to see when you have the second biggest chip stack. Don't want to play against the chip leader where you might have a chance of going out in eighth or seventh place when otherwise you could have played it safe and gotten further.
Yeah.
See Ben here thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think, it's definitely a very dicey situation that you find yourself in as Ben, just willing to kind of risk your own tournament life as well. Just has 2 overs and a gut shot to a straight. What does Shikar want to do with pocket tens when there is an overcard to the board? It does almost feel like it's a little too good to fold, but again, maybe doesn't really know too much about what Ben's ranges are going to be in this spot. So still a little concerning to see that overcard. And with all of this side action happening, Will can't feel good about ace high.
No, he's hoping for spades here, I think. That's what he's rooting for. His ace is live, which is nice for him, but he's definitely worried. 7 of spades does come in on the turn. Will is rooting hard here. Wow, Ben is gonna put the screws to Shikar, and the graphics say we have a call. I haven't seen Shikar's decision yet on camera, but looks like we have an all in and a call for a three-way all in here. Ben perhaps thinking that Shikar played it pretty passively. He just called on pre-flop. He just called on the flop. But the aggression is not rewarded as a jack comes off on the river. Pocket tens hold up. And of course, the biggest stack of Shikar is going to hold up.
We have a double elimination. Yeah, that's a nice call, I think, by Shikar. He was getting a pretty good price, but I think, again, just understanding that there are going to be some of those semi-bluffs in his opponent's range there when he goes all in. Certainly going to be a lot of other hands that potentially they'd be willing to go in with that are unmade at that point, and Shikar just wanting to go with his tens and does get rewarded for that turn call.
Yeah, massive pot, of course. Like we said, Ben was second in chips before that hand, puts it all on the line, and it gets called by Shikar, who holds up on the river. And it's just looking at Shikar's best poker advice. It reads, "Trust your gut, ... sometimes." And he certainly trusted his gut on that call and was rewarded big time.
Yeah, and I think people overlook sometimes how important and instinctual this game can be as well. Again, it's all of the information that you've been able to compile throughout the day and throughout playing with your opponents. Some of the times it just really does come down to feel. Sometimes you're a good deck reader. Like sometimes I'll be like, I think it's coming, so I'm gonna call. You just have to be in the moment and go with the decision that you feel is right. But I think that's the interesting part about poker is sometimes you get instantly rewarded for following your gut, and sometimes you very instantly see that you made the wrong decision, and then you still have to play through the feeling of maybe trusting your gut and being wrong and still being able to make good decisions from that point forward. And sometimes that can be hard. So it's important to always just take each hand as it comes and to not allow mistakes to compound.
Absolutely. And I think one important way to help there to make sure that you keep your gut in check, so to speak, while still listening to it is what we do in the office, in the day-to-day trading, is not only like I said, like I try to write down, thoughts I have about what I did wrong or poorly, but also talking to the people next to you, your bosses, your colleagues, your mentors and so forth. And, describing the situation to them, asking them, what do you think about my decision? What would you have done differently? What information would you have, obtained before making a decision on this? All of those kind of questions, I think, are also come up in poker, right? You talk to your friends about, I had this hand history. When I lost, it was because I had this hand, my opponent had that hand, I played it this way, and getting some feedback and being able to, again, not only you know, see the result of the hand, but more importantly, have someone else kind of double check you on your thought process is super valuable.
Yeah, and I definitely want to come back to that in a second. I have a couple follow-up questions, but we do see Sean all in here with Ace Jack. And Shakar made the call from the cutoff with Ace Queen, so does have Sean dominated. And now it's
And
back
Drew,
around.
I think Drew put it in here with on
Oh,
the
he
button with the ace
did.
nine of spades. And Shakar, of course, comes back to him only 2,600 more with ace queen. We're gonna see another three-way all in here, pre-flop this time.
Yeah, we could have another double KO here at the hands of Shakar. Just gonna be
Yeah,
a one-man wrecking ball to these final table lists, perhaps.
and David and Adarva and James here, they're looking at it and they're saying, this is great. Like I get to just sit here and in the course of two, three hands, potentially see four players eliminated. We'll see how this hand plays out, but it's a great feeling to have when you have a relatively small stack. I talked earlier about James deciding to fold the ace seven offsuit on the button, and now it's been, four hands later or something. He hasn't even paid the blinds yet. He still has 6,000, and we've lost two players and now could lose, potentially another two. So definitely speaks to that value of, trying to weigh how much am I winning from going for it here and potentially picking up some more chips, versus how much am I potentially, losing from not letting other players, go at risk first.
Yeah, definitely a collision kind of effect that benefits the shorter stacks when other stacks that are larger than yours end up going all in. And so it is really nice for the other players to be able to hopefully capitalize on what looks like some potential ladders. If Ace Queen holds up, it is the best hand here. And he does have the other two dominated. It appears okay. Has Shakar made the call? Is he just kind of stacking? It's a nice feeling when you're still stacking chips from the previous pot and you have two players all in and the decision's back on you when you've got such a good hand.
I'm curious how you feel. It's a live read or a live tell that I've been told in the past that if a player is still stacking chips from a previous hand, if they then choose to play a pot while they're still stacking chips, that means they're generally stronger than average. And the rationale would be, if you have a marginal hand, but you're busy and you're frazzled and you're still kind of stacking chips, you might just give it away. So the fact that you decided to play despite, being busy stacking your chips means you likely have an above average hand.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that, but I will say, okay, it's very similar to other things like, I'll be eating sometimes at the poker table, and if I stop to eat,
Oh, wow.
oh, looks like trips
That's game
comes
over, right?
down. Yeah, for Shakar. And the turn brings the six of hearts, but only Shakar has the ace of hearts in hand. And so GG to Sean and Drew, another double elimination. Wow. And just like that, we are down to four players. And Shakar with a commanding lead, 32 big blinds. And Atarva second in chips only with 4.6 big blinds. I mean, I don't want to say it's a lock, but do you want to bet right now? I'll take Shakar. You could have the rest of the field.
What odds am I getting? That's the real question,
No,
right?
we're do.
Even money? No, come on.
I mean, it's very, very ambitious of me to think that someone like you would take such a bad bet, but I had to try. I had to try. Um,
Very fair.
but going back to your point, I agree, but that's also where I've used that to my advantage, where I know that some players might think that, so I actually will raise a marginal hand while it appears that I'm busy doing something where I would only stop in order to raise what is an actually like easy decision. But
Right.
but I definitely agree that those are things again that everyone should be paying attention to. And you can definitely really get in the weeds with all of the little things that has some type of information attached to it or is some type of signaling that the player isn't aware of. But then you could also, you have to remember how they could use it against you and use maybe what might be a common misperception against you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you're saying you're actually, you've also identified that some players believe that. I suggested that this might be a tell of sorts, and then you're saying, well, I'm taking it to the next level. So that means, you've not only identified an inefficiency, but you're also sort of exploiting the fact that you think other thinking players might, adjust in the wrong way, in those situations, which it certainly can get into a leveling war of sorts. But if you have a good handle of where your opponent is on the kind of level of analysis, then it can be very profitable, of course, to do that. We see James here flops a pair, and is he gonna get a call here from Shikar with the queen
Wow.
high? And James, just checked it down. Hits the straight on the river and is going to double up here. Maybe I should have taken your bet after all. See James getting a little bit closer, of course. Shikar still very high up in chips.
And it looks like the final giveaway question has been posted, and you have 5 minutes to answer the question of how many hands were played at the final table of Susquehanna's annual firm-wide no-limit Texas Hold'em poker tournament. And the winner's going to get a poker set. That's exciting. So if you don't already have a poker set at home, it's going to come in handy. I love when people come over and that's like the first game that they always want to play because they know that I have a poker set. I can't even, if I don't even feel like playing poker, I can't lie because they know that I have a chip set at home. There's just no way for me to be like, oh, sorry, we can't play. But there are days when, some of my friends, they're just always so eager to play poker because they don't play professionally. And that's like always the first thing they want to do. And I'm like, do you all really think that that's what I want to be doing? No.
That is, it's similar to when we were talking earlier, and I was saying, a lot of my colleagues, they might have played a lot initially, but after a few years, it's like when you want to take a little breather and have some time outside of work, sometimes it's like I want to do something else.
Yep.
The poker set in question is it actually has they're SIG branded chips. I have one at home, or I used to have one at home. My brother's actually borrowing it. He's studying abroad at a school in the Midwest, so I let him use it for the semester when he's out there, figuring that he might have some college kids who he can play with. But it's a nice poker set.
You might not get that back. I think you are you eligible to answer this question? Because maybe you're in need of a new chip set.
That's true. That's true. Let's make sure that everyone who has not answered, please do so, and remember to send your answers to campus@sig.com, campus@sig.com.
Looks like David is all in from the big blind, forced all in with Jack 6, and Atarva is going to be in with pocket 7s.
The pocket 7s is certainly a strong hand when you're up against a random hand in the big blind. Of course, David here forced all in, like you said, with less than 2,400 to post a big blind. Not a lot of help on the flop. Does make a pair on the turn, but of course, still behind. Wow, we're down to our final three with Tarva and James relatively even here, and Shikar, of course, up top. David from Queens, New York, which poker advice served him really well today. Do the best you can, leave the rest to fate. Certainly did very well to get this far and didn't quite reach all the way, but hey, sometimes fate rewards you and sometimes it doesn't. So fourth place finish for David, and now we're down to the final three. I see players maybe shifting a little bit. There's a lot of space at the table. It's always fun when you get down, past six-handed and you realize, oh wait, there's no more players to fill the seats next to me. I can take a little more space and
Yep.
get a little more comfortable.
That's the nicest part about, being shorthanded is just all that extra room.
Now it'll be interesting to see how Atarba and James both handle this situation because they're very close in chips. And of course, if they double up, they're still pretty far behind Shakar. So the risk here when you're in Atarba or James's shoes is if you get into a spot where you're, risking going out in second, which of course still has a nice $3,000 payout, risking going out in third for a $3,000 payout, but you're not getting that much closer to winning the tournament. Is it really worth it to risk it all to potentially win? And here, I mean, we see it right away.
Yep.
Funny enough, Atarva with the straight flush draw, needing the five of clubs to make a straight flush, but of course has other ways to win as well. And Shikar, the jack of clubs and middle pair, calls it off, and we could be down to heads up
Ooh.
immediately.
That's an interesting eight of clubs, but Shakar with the jack of clubs could draw to a higher flush. Ooh.
Shikar makes a straight at the end, but no good versus the six high flush. Sorry, the 6-4 of clubs making a 8 high flush, I believe, for Atarba. Wow, now we have a little bit of life here. Atarba thinking maybe I can actually catch up. If I double up one more time, now I'm the big stack suddenly.
Yeah, things can definitely change very quickly in No Limit Texas Hold'em, but James is very firmly now the shortest stack, and so he understands again that he has a lot less to lose. So with a stack like that where you've got about 6 big blinds, you really want to start being a little bit more liberal with the hands that you're willing to go all in with.
Yeah, I think that's a big consideration. I think James has played on the maybe more conservative side so far, letting other people getting it all in and playing for it all, and he's been able to find spots here and there to chip up without risking too much. But of course, like you said, when you look around and all those stacks that used to be a little shorter than you now are in fact eliminated, now you're the one who has to get a little bit more aggressive and see if you can find a double up here and stay in it.
Yeah, and going back to kind of what you were talking about earlier, Anders, I was just really interested in, flushing it out a little further because I think the interesting part about poker is that it is a very individualistic game, right? And so there's not a lot of opportunity in game, of course, for collaboration and for, trying to, get any type of feedback in real time from your opponents. They would not want to be giving you any type of helpful information. But of course, there is some collaboration outside of playing, with studying and, pre kind of solver era. There is so much of like talking about hands with your friends who also end up becoming your opponents, right? But kind of in the trading world, how do you feel about that collaborative process and how are you able to weigh that out with some of the work that you end up doing, which is going to be very individual in nature still?
Yeah, I mean, I think just want to make sure we're not missing the action here as it looks like Atarba maybe called the small blind and James, I think, went all in the big blind and got a quick fold from Atarva, if I'm reading the camera right. So we're moving on to the next hand with Atarva making the fold. I think when it comes to collaboration in trading, I think there's certainly multiple avenues. I think one of the big pieces comes down to you have to optimize of when do you have time to ask for feedback and collaborate on an answer, and when do you have to make a decision in the moment? I think that's a big decision where sometimes, if you are, a little bit passive and you don't really take the spot immediately, and instead you go and check with your risk manager and you say, hey, should I make this bet? By the time, 5, 10 minutes have passed, the opportunity might be gone. And so part of the game, I think, is figuring out, when am I, certain enough to make this bet on my own, and when do I have time to go to my risk manager, ask my colleague next to me, what do you think? Do you think this is a spot I should, bet big, bet small, or fold, so to speak, to use some poker terms? One place where it comes up in is, we have a few traders who trade the same product, right? So if it's a product that's particularly high value, so to speak, or there's a lot of volumes in a certain product, at Susquehanna, we're involved in trading basically every type of product under the sun, but we are market makers is how we started as a firm. So we're market making a certain product, having several people pay attention to it, and in real time being able to say, hey, we should bet this, right? And the other person saying yes, to just get that quick feedback loop of like, we're on the same page, is, I think, hugely valuable, because when you're both in agreement, you get to bet, twice or 4 times as big as you would have done if you were just by yourself and perhaps not quite as confident. And so those kind of situations where you can, again, just talk to your colleague, check what opinion they have, and if so, you just have more confidence to bet really big, I think is very helpful. Imagine if you got a minute or even 10 seconds to just look at your friend and say, hey, I have this hand, this is my read, what do you think? Would be worth a lot at the poker table.
Yeah, I would pay good money for a phone a friend.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, again, it just so many parallels, and it relates back to poker in the sense of just, having confidence sometimes in your decision making in really high pressure situations is so important. Is just being able to kind of go with what you know, and to also feel like you've prepared enough for that moment when you do need to make a decision and there is no one around, or you don't have the time to get that feedback.
Exactly. And being able to seize the moment, like you said. Here we see Atarba and James involved in an all-in. Of course, the two shorter stacks, not that surprising to see both of them getting it in here with a suited ace versus a ace queen. And of course, on this board, ace queen is going to hold up. And I believe Atarba had James slightly covered. So James is going to finish in third place, take home a very respectable $3,000 for his efforts. He's played poker for about a year and a half, and I gotta say, a $3,000 score after a year and a half is pretty solid. I'm pretty sure I had not yet won $3,000 playing poker in a single setting after a year and a half. So kudos to James, great finish, and now we're down to heads up.
I mean, listen, that's the start of a bankroll. You might see James. He lives in New York. You might see him go down to Atlantic City and play a little 1-3 cash game.
Very possible. Very possible. It's I've spent a little bit of time in Atlantic City, but we have some nice casinos here in Philadelphia as well. There's a lot of options, of course, on the East Coast. I wonder if they're setting up, across the table in typical heads-up fashion here, or if they're staying in their seats, don't want to move too much, don't want to change any of the good luck they've been having in their assigned seats. But two players playing for it all. Of course, they've each locked up $5,000, in second place, and they're effectively playing a heads-up match here for $5,000 for the winner, which is it's a lot of money to play for heads up.
Yeah, and with kind of similar chip stacks going into heads up, especially being on the shallower side anyways, I think it's really, oh wait, does James still have a tenth of a big blind? Call him back. A chip and a chair, people.
Exactly. Chip and a chair.
Done. This is how it's done.
We apologize for the graphics being slightly wrong here. Of course, James here sitting on a a sixth of a big blind, trying to spin something up here. The 9-3 offsuit, still a 35% chance of winning. Not done yet. Like you said, chip in a chair.
So
That's
you're saying there's a chance.
exactly.
Oh, it's dwindling now down to 14%, though. Not looking great.
You're really hitting on me, huh?
All right. Well, for the second time, we thank James for his efforts. Of course, now the graphics should be in order. We've got very similar stats to what we were expecting here with Shakar and Atarva. Very close in chips, like you said. And it'll be interesting to see if we see a lot of all-ins here, or if we see kind of more a small ball approach of trying to limp in um, to see a flop. But it's it's got to be a nervous moment. You know, you're gonna have to figure out if you want to wait for a good hand or if you want to get aggressive and win some small pots and get some chips that way.
Yeah, I think there's an element of kind of when you reach this stage of being the final two players, though, that you already feel like you've almost won, right? So I think that, there is this nice mentality of like, at the very least, I'm going to get to take home $5,000. So why not just, go for it and just put it all on the line and be willing to be really aggressive and step up to the plate, because it's kind of a free roll, because worst case scenario, you're still going to go home with 5K, but best case scenario, you can essentially bully your opponent and keep, taking one or two big blinds per pot away from them. And it'll leave them in a situation where they're going to very quickly have no folds equity. So it will be nice to see kind of one of the players take this approach, I think, because both of them have been, fairly, I think, cautious with their general approach so far, and it really has come down to, who's had the better hands throughout the day.
Yeah, I said sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I feel like both players have been a little bit on the side of playing a few more hands, trying to get involved, trying to see if they can spin up a big stack, which of course both of them have been able to do, but I don't think either player has been hyper aggressive. We've seen a few other players getting in there and trying to see if they can build up a big stack. Drew comes to mind as a player who took his spots with his big hands and tried to push it his advantage. But here we see Atarva actually coming in for the race with top pair. Of course, when you're only two players, top pair is a very strong hand, and he gets Shakar to fold his gut shot. Of course, Shakar could have hit a six for a straight, and for the first time here in it must be 20 hands or so, Shakar is no longer top of the leaderboard. Atarva just passes him with that last pot. Still very, very close, of course.
And it's important to note that, heads up strategy differs greatly from full ring and even, six-handed strategy. And so, just in terms of the ranges that you play and in terms of kind of the hands that you are going to be willing to, get all the way to the river with, now you're not thinking about just top pair hands. You've got to look at your bottom pair hands. You've got to look at hands that have a lot of backdoor equity. You have to find a way to stay in there and to make sure you're defending every chip that goes into the pot. And so certainly just like the tone that you have to set is going to be different than, when you get to take a few hands off, because, in a full ring situation, you play a hand, you take a hand off, but here you essentially have no hands off.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen, I think to start so far, Atarva has taken a little bit of a more aggressive approach, I think. Just playing, of course, hit top pair with the queen, but otherwise, trying to see if he can raise here on the button and not just come in for the call. So definitely that's benefited him so far, as he's gone up to 16 big blinds here to Shakar's 11.
Oh, oops, sorry.
You're the big. 3,000, 1,500 Shakir. Action's on you, Shakir.
Small card for both players, and a little aggression from Shakar here is going to work out, racing it up to a min race, and of course getting the snap fold from Atarva with the 8-2 offsuit.
Yeah, and it does look like, even though we can't hear table audio, that these players seem to be having a good time, right? They're kind of talking to each other from across the table. There's been some smiles and some laughs exchanged. And I think, again, that's a function of just getting to this point where you can breathe a little sigh of relief. It feels really tense, kind of trying to get into the money initially. And then there's this flurry of all ins where you're really just trying to stay alive and stay in the mix. But now it's kind of like the pressure is just off.
Yeah, I think. Oh wow, that's quite the flop here. Heads up with
Call. All right. Well, 15,000.
Atarva flopping three of a kind, and Shikar, of course, with top pair.
Just put a bunch of blacks out here.
That race and a call on the flop.
Stack them up. Gigantic stack.
You have to think there's a real chance that, regardless of if Shikar can hit a queen and get there, this could be our final hand. It's really hard to see Shikar getting away. I mean, if two spades come for some reason, of course you start get worried, but it's very hard to make top pair, to make trips in heads up play. Your opponent could have a draw, they could have a lower pair that they're racing for a little bit of protection, perhaps, and
Yeah, I mean, plain and simple, this is just a cooler. Whether it's
right.
ring, whether it's even way, sometimes you're just not able to top pair against trips, especially again with those drop. And so, I just don't see, especially on kind of these shallower stacks. If we're 100 BBs deep, then maybe we can avoid having to be all in this spot. We are going to lose a chunk, but when we're so short, there's just nothing else you can do but put your chips in the middle. And Shakar sees the bad news. He's gonna need a queen on the river here to outdraw Atarva.
A queen and a queen only. Atarva, I don't believe ever had pocket aces, but he is all in anyway with the full house. Like you said, Shakar looking for a queen and a queen only, and with that, Atarva is gonna take home first place. Shakar in a very, very nice second place finish, which wraps up our actual play for today. It's been quite a lot of variance back and forth. Of course, Atarva, we followed him at the feature table for most of the night. Shikar started on the secondary table and has now come in, but they both, of course, happy with today, even though you always want to finish first in a tournament.
Yeah, and Atarva just seems to kind of, been his day, things going his way very early on, and just able to take it all the way to this first place finish, taking home $10,000 in the Susquehanna Showdown.
A very nice finish. I had the pleasure of meeting both Atarva and Shikar when I was tournament director for our two earlier tournaments, one in New York and the other one in Chicago. And both very nice players, of course, did very well to get through the qualifiers for those tournaments, the tournaments in their respective city, and now, of course, finishing first and second in the Susquehanna Showdown for $10,000 and $5,000 respectively. I gotta say, the play was more aggressive than I was expecting. I think early on we had a couple of three bets, we had a couple of bluffs. I forget the name of the player who ran the two street bluff on the flop and turn with the king queen, where Shikar really made most of his chips with the pocket tens, the hero call on the turn versus king queen. That was a big pot. I want to say perhaps it was Ben getting it in there.
So yeah.
But
Yeah,
go ahead.
I've definitely kind of been impressed with the speed of the play, in the sense of, players kind of coming in with a little bit of urgency to recognize, like, hey, we're all starting with the same chip stack, so why not come out of the gates while these other players don't have that much information on me, and maybe try to get in the mix and put the aggression
Like I'm good at stats,
on
but
everyone else. And I just really liked kind of how
hit 600.
friendly the game was, but how focused everybody seemed to be on what was happening. And, everybody just seemed like they showed up here really wanting to do their best, regardless of the amount of experience they had prior to coming in here. And, I hope they had fun. And I think the best part, and I think the most fun thing about this tournament and these events that you guys do in house is just being able to watch it back is such a cool experience that so many players don't really get. There's players that have been playing poker professionally for years and they've never played on a live stream table before. They've never been able to play, on an RFID table where they're able to kind of watch back and see the mistakes they make and to be able to kind of dissect and learn from all of, their plays, but as well as their opponent's plays and see what worked and what didn't. And so I think this is just a real treat to be able to get this opportunity, not only with the prize pool, but to also just get the experience of playing on a feature table, on a final table.
Absolutely, and I'll just take the moment to note to our viewers that, of course, it seems like after counting up all the chips, we're following the graphics. The graphics are, coded just based on what the estimated chip counts were. But in fact, it appeared that Shakar had a few hundred chips left in his stack. That, of course, after that 10-6 versus 6-5 hand, did not get him back in contention. And as expected, Atarva does finish first, and Shakar does finish second. Yeah, like you said, I think the live stream is a lot of fun. We do a company-wide tournament every year. Nice little check there for Atarva, $10,000, not too bad. We do a company-wide tournament every year that gets live streamed, and the rest of the firm can kind of watch as the final table or two gets played down. And like you said, it's a lot of fun. You can go back, you can watch what did my opponent actually have that hand? Did I get bluffed? All that definitely adds a little bit to the allure and to just the kind of experience of not just saying, oh, I guess it's over now, but actually being able to look back and relive your big tank when you had to call it off and so forth. So it's been a pleasure running a commentary as well. It was our first time as a firm running a commentary on a live stream, and I had a pleasure doing it with you. And as we see, just some photos being taken here of the winner and the final three, I think. But I really appreciate you taking the time, of course, to come out and commentate with us and spend a Saturday afternoon.
Of course, I had a lot of fun, and I feel like next time I come and visit Philadelphia, I need to stop by the offices and get in a little poker game with you all over at Susquehanna.
Absolutely, we would be glad to play. Like I said, it's trading and poker have so many similarities, particularly when it comes to analyzing an uncertain world where you have to try to put your money where your mouth is a little bit and make the best bets you can. We'd love to have you, and we'd love having you here as a co-commentator. And with that, I think we will wrap up the commentary. It's been a pleasure commentating for all of you guys and alongside you, Maria. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for watching.
All right, take care.